Good morning. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Let me first welcome everyone to the New York State Senate Standing Committee on Elections public hearing on election administration and voting rights. We will be having a series of these hearings throughout the state, but of course we are starting in Brooklyn, in central Brooklyn and in Senate District 20. And we have a storied institution that has been gracious enough to host us this morning. And so we are going to have them bring us a welcome. And to do that is Dr. Whitehead, who is the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Chief of Staff right here at Medgar Evers College.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Senator Myrie, for that introduction. And to Senators Lieu, Senators Krueger, and Senator Giannaris, we welcome you to Medgar Evers College. As the Senator mentioned, I'm Kimberly Whitehead, Senior Vice President for Strategy and Chief of Staff here at Medgar Evers College, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our campus on this beautiful July day. I welcome you on behalf of our new president, Dr. Patricia Ramsey, who could not be here today with us, but sends her regards and thank you for your continued support. I wish to thank Senator Myrie for affording the college this opportunity to host this very important hearing. Our staff is here to assist you if you need anything. And again, welcome to Medgar Evers College, and thank you for all that you do. Have a great day.
Thank you very much, Dr. Whitehead. A little bit of housekeeping before we continue. Of course, I have been joined by my colleagues in the state Senate. I'm very grateful that they're here with us. I'm joined, of course, by Senator Brian Cavanaugh, Senators John Lieu, and Liz Krueger. Thank you for your attendance. I'd also like to thank my staff that has really made this possible. So big thanks to Edleen, Matt, Frida, Tyrianne, and to the central staff who helped put this together, Chris Higgins, Liz Robbins, Andrew Golston, and of course to our sound techs, the people who are making this all look right, Tom Cahill, Matt Carter, and Donna Kessler. I want to thank Medgar Evers College for hosting us today. Many of you are already complying with this, but it bears repeating that they have a policy where everyone should be wearing masks indoors unless you are speaking. So when the witnesses come up to testify, you can remove your mask, but otherwise you should have your mask on. And it is no coincidence that we are kicking off our hearings on voting rights in an institution named after Medgar Evers. As some of you may know, Medgar Evers was assassinated in his driveway because he was registering black voters in the South. And so when we talk about voting being the right that protects all other rights, it isn't just hyperbole. This is an ideal that our country is supposed to live up to. But unfortunately, we have seen in recent months that we are relitigating many of the arguments that we had back in the civil rights era. We have states that are rolling back access to the franchise. Just a couple of months ago, insurrectionists sieged the Capitol under a false and dangerous premise that our elections were rigged. And so what we're talking about here today is access to the franchise that is not only important to New Yorkers, but really important to the entire country. And we can't, as New York, simply say, that's not happening here and that's not us. Unfortunately, there were too many New Yorkers for which voting is difficult, cumbersome, and for some, not an option through no fault of their own. Now, since this Senate majority has assumed the majority, New York has made a lot of advances. We've passed early voting, electronic poll books, pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds, consolidation of the primaries, restoration of voting rights for individuals leaving incarceration, automatic voter registration, the expansion of the use of absentee ballots during the pandemic, and of course, the first steps for constitutional amendments as it pertains to same-day registration and no excuse absentee voting. But at the same time, we've also seen throughout the state impediments to early voting. We've seen jurisdictions exclude predominantly black neighborhoods from early voting sites. We've seen the last congressional race in the entire country called in the state of New York because of malfeasance and incompetence at the boards of elections. We've seen stalemates that are partisan in nature on the placement of polling sites. And of course, right here in New York City, we've experienced voter purges, scanner breakdowns, absentee ballots sent to the wrong place and at the wrong time, extremely long lines, lack of language interpreters, incorrect preliminary results, and much, much more. Now, this Senate majority, thanks to the leadership of our majority leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, is determined to continue the work that we started on the first day of the legislative session in 2019. And that is the journey from worst to first. Now, some of that may require some changes to the structure of the Board of Elections. It may require us making other statutory changes. It may require reforms to our election laws. And all of that is on the table. So I'm excited to be joined by my colleagues today, and I'm excited to begin the process of delivering a world-class democracy to every single voter in the state of New York. Now, to the legions of viewers at home who are watching our committee hearing, this hearing is going to look a little different than the ones that you've seen in the past. Normally, we hear from the boards of elections, good government groups, advocacy organizations, and we have the opportunity to question them oftentimes for hours. But we're going to flip that dynamic on its head today and in the subsequent hearings, and we are going to center the voters. You will be hearing directly from voters this entire hearing. And the reason for that is it is important to us, it is important to this majority, it is important to our majority leader to take our direction from the most important entity in this process, and that is you, the voter. So thank you to all of you who have already submitted testimony. For those of you who have not submitted written testimony, you still have the opportunity to do so. And of course, thank you to all of you who have showed up in person today to talk to us about election administration and voting rights. So housekeeping rules. Witnesses, you have 5 minutes to give testimony. We have clocks that are within your view. I'm hopeful that I will not have to use this gavel, but I don't think that we're going to be in that situation today. Then our senators will have the opportunity to ask questions if they so desire. They will have 3 minutes to do that. We have a good number of panels with witnesses today, and so I am eager to get started, but would give any of my colleagues the opportunity to bring any opening remarks if they desired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening this important hearing. I want to thank all the participants. I think our chairperson has already said it best, that we want democracy to work, and that means the voters have to have every opportunity to cast their ballots. I'm heartened to see what happened in the election last month right here in New York City, where voter turnout was far greater than anybody had imagined, and that's a good sign for our democracy. But we should not rest easy because of those results. We should continue to push for a even stronger democracy, one that has really gathered a great deal of steam since Senator Zelnor Myrie became elections chair. And in our very first hearing, in our very first Senate meeting as the Democratic majority, he ushered in a host of reforms to our election process. We've passed additional legislation every single year in 2019, 2020, 2021, and I don't think our work is done. Combining that legislation with strong and vigorous oversight over the various boards of elections and continually soliciting input from the voters, the most important entities in this process, as the chairman said. This is our process. I'm very proud to be part of the Senate and trying to further invigorate and strengthen our democracy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Kavanaugh?
is very briefly, just wanted to take a moment to thank the chair for bringing this hearing together. As he said, our leader, Andrew Stewart Cousins, and the work of legislators in both houses really have ushered in a major change in our elections for the good toward greater democracy and greater participation. And Senator Myrie's role as the chair in bringing that about has been really pivotal. It's also really great to be here, and this one of our first hearings in person, and to see that these hearings, the election committee will be going around the state for further input. And just to say, I spent 11 years in the Assembly and a few years since in the Senate, and for many, many years, many of the changes that we've seen come about in the few years were considered really beyond possibility. We worked for many years to get early voting and same-day registration and many of the other provisions that have moved forward in the past couple of years to the floor of both houses and passed, and they were blocked. So it is a really important moment for New York to take stock of what we've done in the last few years to strengthen our democracy, and also to recognize that that work is not done, and also that we are doing this work in the context of a country where in many states there are very dramatic efforts to roll back reforms that had been put in place to strengthen democracy and expand participation. It's just a few years ago that in a lawsuit in North Carolina, New York was used as an example by people trying to defend restrictions on voting rights by saying, well, New York doesn't have these things, why do we need them here in North Carolina? That was in a federal lawsuit in the briefs and in the opinion of a judge. So it's nice not to be in that worse category, as my colleague has branded it aptly. But it is important that we continue to work toward strengthening the democracy, and I'm very glad that we're here today as part of that process.
Thank you very much, Senator Kavanaugh, and Senator Krueger.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. First off, thank you for your leadership of this committee. As John Liu said, since the Democrats took the Senate majority and the people on the stage got to be chairs of committees, we have seen a radical shift in the type of bills that come to the floor for the Senate and the bills that are passing. And thanks to you, we have passed a number of critically important election changes. And yet it's not enough. And so the focus needs to be on what more needs to be done. There are other things we can fix in the law, in our administration of the elections. But I will say, just for people who sometimes forget how quickly we are working to change these things, that I was in the Senate not in a majority role for most of 18 years before we took the majority back. And I remember only one bill on voting coming to the floor of the Senate, and that was a bill that would allow you to register to vote if you were in a gun store buying a gun or getting a hunting license. And I remember having a debate on the floor and saying, so if I want to go to a gun store, not buy a gun or register to hunt, I could still register to vote? No, only if you're buying a gun or registering to hunt. We're only interested in registering those people to vote. And I assumed that the entire Senate chamber would take a deep breath and let it out, and then the bill would die. But of course it did not die. It did not pass the assembly afterwards. But when I hear a description of other states we think, oh, we couldn't possibly be anything like, and that they're citing our bad law as their basis for their own bad efforts, it reminds me, and it should remind all of us today, one, how delicate and fragile democracy is, and we can never take our eye off the ball. Two, how much further New York State needs to go. And three, just in thanks for everybody who's testifying today in person or online or just submitting testimony. And I'm from the wonderful borough of Manhattan. We're not just Brooklynites here. And John is from Queens.
We forgive you. I'm a Brooklynite.
Well, we'll have to talk about that later. If the people of Queens think you live there. We're all New Yorkers. But I think it's just critical that we are listening to you and hearing the experiences you have had. And I know I have been reached out by people who work at the Board of Elections, people who have just had terrible voter experiences, and people who are actually professional observers of how elections should be working and want to give us all their 2 cents. And I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Krueger. So without further ado, we will be calling up the first panel, and we will have 3 witnesses. So please come up when you hear your name called. Jan Combo Piano, Jasmine Cordero, and Judith Hertzberg.
Thank you for having this hearing and allowing all of us to speak about our experiences. I'm going to start not just as a voter, but talking about poll working, because poll working is the front line of elections. They're the people who make it a good experience for voters or who make it a terrible experience for voters. In New York City, we have over 1,200 poll sites on Election Day. That means we have between 30,000 and 40,000 poll workers, usually. They are the heart of making elections work, and yet we have very little resources or attention paid to them in election administration. On Election Day for the primary in June, I ended up being a coordinator for a poll site. There were 9 of us. There should have been 26. I barely had 1 person for every role, and I had to be a table inspector in addition to being the coordinator. You mentioned earlier that so many people came out to vote, almost a million. And so we had lines all day long. Because we only had enough people for each role, nobody could take a break. I begged the Board of Elections for more poll workers. They were like, we totally understand. Tons of other poll sites don't have enough people as well. Because we only had enough people to staff 1 person per table, we didn't have bipartisanship that was in the law. And quite frankly, in New York City, we never really have that. People are Republican for the day. And we've had really good elections and really good voting experiences with that. So I'm putting that out there, that we know how to have nonpartisan election administration in this city. Because we didn't have enough people and I couldn't get anyone from the BOE, I had to ask the community. And a shout out to Gowanus Mutual Aid for people who showed up. Some people who had been previous poll workers and some people who had never been poll workers before showed up in my poll site, and we trained them. And they allowed us to keep going for the whole day. That's great. We have community involvement. We shouldn't need that. We should have enough to be able to do it ourselves. The reason I had to take over as coordinator for that poll site is because the person who was assigned to be the coordinator, who was the coordinator last year, where all the poll workers complained, the AD monitors knew this person was terrible, and so they had to come back at the end of the night and actually close out and do the canvass for her because she couldn't do it. And the district leaders, both the Democratic and Republican, said this person cannot be a coordinator or a poll worker again, yet she got assigned. So there does seem to be missing accountability in the BOE. I do want to give a shout out for all the poll workers who did help people vote and people got to vote. But I think they need a little bit more attention. If voting is so central and democracy is so important, then we need a little bit more help. We need more training. We need more accountability. We need to change the way we do election day poll sites. Pretty soon, we're going to have a same-day registration. Not sure how that's going to come out, but we know it's going to involve the poll worker. And that's a concern. So if we do poll site on election day a little bit more like we do it on early voting, where there are trained people handling affidavit ballots, for example, or somebody trained for same-day registration, then that can work. I'm also going to talk about my personal experience about not having enough people and having to get people in the community. I think we could have it where we could staff elections with people who are not Republicans or Democrats, who are blanks, who are Working Families Party, who are whatever they want to be. We do that for interpreters, for the accessibility clerks. We could expand that, but that does need legislative help. But I want to put it out there, that will help voters. Democracy takes work, and the workers who practice democracy need help. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jasmine Cordero, and I worked as a poll worker in the South Bronx. During this time, I have seen many members of the working class having to take long commutes to the Bronx from Brooklyn. They must choose between voting and potentially being late when loss of employment is not an option. I have seen people ask me how long will voting take. As someone who worked as a polls, I could not really tell them. All I had to tell them was, you just tell them your building number and you go to the table. They would often shrug their shoulders and repeat, I quote, "That's too much work." I later found out that they were only working in the Bronx, and they thought that they could still vote here, although they're registered in Brooklyn. And I told them that was impossible. I told them that couldn't happen because you would have to either sign in an absentee ballot or you can go over to your polling site before closing. Oftentimes, once again, they would shrug their shoulders and say, too much work. This is not supposed to be a situation where people are choosing the luxury of voting. People should vote because it is a human right. The working class should not have to choose between their paycheck and the right to vote. I personally want to see Election Day for both the primary and the general elections be a federal holiday. When people are given a day off, they are still receiving holiday pay, turnout to the polls will increase. Not only will this be increased by the members of the working class, this will also be increased by younger people. As someone who has worked as a field coordinator for certain political campaigns, I was often shunned by young people who did not care about voting or didn't know who the politicians were or why it was important to vote. I often had to explain to them why voting was important and how it is a human right for everyone. They later shrugged their shoulders and said, I am not old enough to vote, go tell someone else. This is very unfortunate because I've seen so many young people eager to want to talk to me when I do field coordinating. They just don't know what to do when they tell me they're too young. I want to see more young people, 16 years and older, to be able to vote because they have the human right to vote, and it should not be a privilege or a luxury. It should be a right. So I would like to see the general and the primaries be granted to kids 16 years and older, and I would like for it to be a federal holiday. We cannot keep complaining about lower poll outreach. We cannot keep complaining about people not coming in to vote if you do not make it accessible for everyone. Thank you.
My name is Judith Hertzberg. Thank you very much for hearing my testimony today. I am a registered voter in Senatorial District 20. I'm active in the community and grassroots groups, including True Blue New York, Brooklyn Voters Alliance, and Empire State Indivisible. I have 3 areas of concern to talk about today. One is patronage at the Board of Elections. The second is professionalism or lack thereof at the Board of Elections. And the third is improving the voter experience. And I appreciate the opening remarks of each of the members of the committee, particularly with respect to the importance of the voter, because frequently I feel like the voter is the product and not the customer, and that has to change. The voter must be the customer. Patronage and professionalism, ironically, go hand in hand. Party bosses pick loyalists who do not have the skills and qualifications to do the jobs assigned to them. They are there to collect a paycheck. And I have seen this in many aspects of the voting process, but particularly noteworthy is in the absentee ballot process. I was an observer counting absentee ballots last year, and it was very disheartening because there were so many people who were just going through the motions. And as we know from the last several primary elections, counting absentee ballots is absolutely critical. And the process was redundant, inefficient, and very error-prone. And the people performing the tasks were not taking it as seriously as they needed to, and many of them didn't have the skills to execute their responsibilities properly. The other part of the absentee ballot process that touched me individually as a resident of the 20th Senatorial District was that I received one of the mislabeled absentee ballots last year in the 2020 election, which was of tremendous concern. That was inexcusable and again showed the lack of professionalism, the lack of controls, the lack of operational understanding of what the process should be or could be. Job skills and standards must be defined and upheld. The voter experience must be improved. Another piece of the absentee ballot process that disturbs me is the fact that we do not have postage paid envelopes for returning absentee ballots. It is impossible to know how much postage to put on an absentee ballot given the variable length of each of the ballots that we've seen in the last several elections. And to ask a voter, one, to even put postage on means that you have to pay for the right to vote. Two, if you don't have a postage scale, you don't know how much to put on. Going to the post office to have it weighed is burdensome. And the post office has said that if you don't have the right postage, your ballot could risk being returned or thrown out, so you're prohibited from voting. More early voting sites are necessary. People are traveling long distances. As my fellow witnesses have said, people have had to travel, and the poll sites are not within walking distance. Again, a voter should not have to pay to get to the polls. Better training for poll workers, especially for those directing voters, is absolutely essential. The affidavit process is not well understood, and more training needs to happen for that. With the affidavit process, frequently used in primaries, voters who are not enrolled in a party are asked to enroll on the affidavit if that is not explained to them. Again, they continue to be disenfranchised. So we must improve the voter experience. Thank you for your time.
Questions? Let me first note that we've been joined by Senator Andrew Gennardez, and Senator Kavanaugh will start with questioning.
Thank you. I guess these questions are probably primarily for the 2 witnesses who have actually been working at poll sites, but obviously also Ms. Hertzberg, if you want to respond as well. But I want to talk a little bit more about the question of how poll site workers are recruited and trained. Ms. Copoviano, you said, how am I doing on pronouncing that?
It's kind of close. It's the two words combo and piano, except together.
Combo piano. Got it, okay. Ms., you mentioned in your testimony the issue of requiring the Board of Elections to use split shifts. I've been around long enough to remember when we had to pass a law to authorize the Board of Elections to use split shifts, but we never required it. Can you just talk a little bit more about that issue and why you think that would be beneficial?
So on election day, whether primary, general election, we have a really long election day here in New York State. For voters, it starts at 6, but for poll workers, it starts before 5 a.m., and it might go to 11 p.m. So we're asking people to work like a 17-hour plus day. And as someone who believes passionately in poll working, has recruited poll workers for years, I'm like 80% of people being like, never again. The day is so long, and my experience this time where we only had 1/3 of the staff that we needed, that meant I couldn't let anyone go on a break. The first time someone got a break was at 11 a.m. because I got someone from Gowanus Mutual Aid to show up, so I could alleviate that. If we had split shifts, we could have more people who have jobs or who have childcare responsibilities or who are students who just cannot, for varying reasons, work that 17 to 19-hour day. It could be more planful, and we could, the way with the e-poll books working, the way with the new Canvas working, if we had ballot on demand, it wouldn't require the person who opened the poll site to be there at closing. And so it would alleviate some of the staffing situation. It would allow us to have a more diverse and more wide-ranging pool of poll workers who actually reflect the city. And I think it would be good for everyone. Working these long days is very draining. I also worked early voting. Working early voting and election day is kind of difficult. And I think if we had that as a requirement, because they're not going to do it unless it's state law, it would make a difference.
Yes, so for my situation, I've only done election day, both for the primary and the general. And for both times, I had I was recruited. I was able to come in person to take a test, which was fine. However, I did find that I think it was much better in use of my time and everybody's time. The people who were at the general elections also with the primary the following year. So I definitely felt like it was much better for everyone involved if there was a term limit. So for me, someone who's done it twice, I, believe that based on what I've done and what I've learned, my time should be better useful somewhere else, and someone else should take my spot and become a poll worker and definitely professionalize this, because this is like long hours. It is a lot of work. There's a lot of paying attention to details. And this is a job that I think people need to take seriously. People need to be able to do the work, take exams to know what to do, take more tests to know what to do, because this is not a sit around and wait situation. This is very much a hands-on, you need to speak to people, you need to be able to work as a team. In my polling site, at the end of the day, our scanners, because I was a scanner, some of them were broken. And that was a lot. I mean, you're talking like 10 plus hours of people standing there taking breaks, however, still being exhausted because all of that scanners had broke. And I had a lot of screaming and yelling and a lot of people kind of giving up at the end of the day. So I definitely believe it needs to be more professionalized, and it needs to be held at a higher standard. If you're all gonna have young people involved, definitely give them exams, tests, so they know what to do. However, yes, I think there needs to be like a term limit. After 2 times you've done this, that should be it.
Interesting. And Ms. Cambopiano, I understand, if I understand correctly, you recruited election workers more or less on the spot to fill gaps in the workforce that have been provided by the Board of Elections and trained them on site
Yes.
to work that day. Can you just, I mean, that's both heroic and sort of disturbing that it was necessary.
Totally in agreement.
Can you talk a little bit more about that process of, like, from your perspective, how the board is doing recruiting? They have they're supposed to have mandatory, I guess, paid training in
Yes.
advance.
Yeah.
You've seen that training. Talk a little bit more about the recruitment and training process that the board exercises now.
Yeah, so the board is really trying to recruit people all the time. They do a lot of advertising, especially around early voting. You know, they talk about how much money you can make, which for some people really does make a big difference. Being able to be a poll worker for a week, like, might really increase their yearly wages, so it is important. But the training that is given, they basically give only specialized training for specific roles, but everybody gets the same training. But like for somebody who has been a poll worker for a few years, you don't need that basic part anymore. You need some other training. And the people who have never been a poll worker really need more hands-on. They do hands-on for the e-poll books. But I've only heard like a few people who've ever had hands-on training for scanners, and they are just happen to be very great people who are like, I wanted to feel like I knew what was going on, so they asked the instructor afterward if they could stay and do the scanner thing. But you don't normally get that in training. This year we had online training. That was okay for me. I've been a poll worker for a long time, just getting a refresher about and the messaging about how should we refer to ranked choice voting, for example, or something like that. But for people who hadn't been a poll worker for a few years, that online training was not sufficient, and we did not have a test at the end of it. And the test we do get in regular in-person training is open book. So that will definitely weed out people who don't have high enough literacy, who don't have capability, but it still brings in a lot of people who might not have a problem solver orientation or customer service orientation, or just being able to follow directions. And so I think having, revamping the training, being able to distinguish between poll workers who are very good, and there are amazing poll workers out there who've been doing it for quite some time, who really can work on the fly. But what I ended up having to do, bringing these folks in, is if they were going to be a table inspector, I'm like, here's what you need to know. So they didn't do anything for like quite a few minutes. They watched me. I made them like take notes. We went through what was needed. Here are the steps. I made the person who was assigned there be their mentor, and so they did it together for about an hour. Anytime they had a problem, somebody would come get me. Somebody would have to watch my table in order to make that happen. So it was quite stressful, but it proved it could be done, but it's the hands-on part that made the difference.
And there's no, each election cycle, if you want to work the polls, you have to go through the training, even irrespective of your prior experience. Is that correct?
So it's once a year that they have training, and it's usually in the summer. Again, this is something that should be looked at because, for example, we had ranked choice voting for the first time in this primary, but the annual cycle for training is after the primary. And so I do think between all of the organizations, the BOE, NYC Votes, Democracy NYC, I will give a shout out to BVA and all the other organizations who did training. Most people really understood ranked choice voting, so that was good. I'm not sure all of the poll workers knew ranked choice voting. That might not have been as necessary, but I did training for poll workers in my district because I was asked by the district leader to do that, just to make sure they actually understood what the ballot was going to look like, because at the time, the BOE hadn't scheduled the training.
Well, let me just end by thanking you for, as you said, the workers who are on site are, some of the most important parts of welcoming voters and making sure democracy is happening. So thank you both for your work, and thank you for your testimony as well, Mr. Schroeder.
Thank you very much, Senator Kavanaugh. You can clap. That's fine. Right. What a guy. We're going to next hear from Senator Krueger, followed by Senator Gennardez.
Thank you. Thank you, because I really have follow-up questions to Senator Kavanaugh. This is so helpful. So when you went out and recruited people just to help you because, we have an election going, we need bodies, did those people get paid later?
They did.
They
So
did.
yes, because I made sure.
Okay.
I put them, so in a poll site, you have something called a forms booklet that everyone has to sign, and I made sure everyone signed it. We did it for the hours that they worked. So I had a few people who came like at 11, they left at 3. I had some people come at 3, and they left later. And so I made them sign it, and I identified that with AD monitors and with the BOE, that these people were not volunteers. They were workers.
Good. So for years, people have pointed out that a 17-hour day is, by most standards, inhuman. Better yet, the norm for election workers. And for years, we talked about bills to allow half-day schedules. So you would have the first the first half of the day and the second half of the day. And then I know that in previous years, Board of Election officials said, well, we're really worried that the first half of the day people will leave and the second half of the day people won't show up. And then what do we do? Although you're describing, we're at that scenario now where they're not showing up at all. So as people who work in polls, what do you think of the idea of having split shifts?
I think split shifts would do wonders, because I've worked with a lot of people who they've had to work their normal job potentially until midnight, and then they have to show up in a poll site at 5 a.m. and they get out at 11 and then go back to their normal job at midnight. That seems inhuman to me. And then there's a lot of people, this is true of voters as well, like they have childcare responsibilities. That's not just a good idea to be there for a child. That is legally required and morally required. And so there are a lot of people who are parents who cannot be poll workers, because how are they going to manage, who's going to take care of their child for 17 hours a day? That seems kind of absurd. Plus, I think a lot of students are like, I can't do this. I have class. I need to do this other thing. But if they knew, it was 5 to 2, and then it was 2 to 10, or however or they would have like a little bit of, maybe it wouldn't be everybody shifting at the same time, which would be quite disruptive. So I understand that. So maybe it's split in like 2 to 3 areas. So there's a little overlap. So everybody is not changing at once. That would probably not work for voters. But I think you could get more and more reliable poll workers if people could do it. And if there were people who could manage it for 17 hours, you do get 2 1-hour breaks, but you can only get a break if there's somebody to take your position. Otherwise, it's not available to you. So it is in law that it's available, but the BOE won't institute it. So that's why I'm going to keep saying I think there needs to be some kind of accountability, some kind of pressure to make that happen.
And you talked about only 9 people showing up when you were supposedly assigned, I think 26, you said?
26 people, yeah.
Did you ever find out after the poll day what happened? Like who screwed up?
I didn't find out after what happened. I found out during the day that like one person got poached to another poll site. And then a couple of people had told the coordinator the day before that they were not coming. And again, this was the coordinator who was terrible. I don't know that she did anything. She never informed anyone else about that. I found that out at 5 a.m. And then when I called the BOE to try to get help, they were like, this is happening all over Brooklyn. And so I don't know if there was anything in particular about this particular election day, but the fact that we couldn't staff it up, and this is not atypical, this has happened in other poll sites, but I've never been part of something that was so extreme. It was only 1/3. You know, I've had it where like maybe a few people didn't show up, but not like this. And, you know, thank God for my team. They were amazing and stepped up and made sure every voter got helped and every voter could vote. But that's just, you know, we're having like these ideas that poll working is, you know, as my fellow panelists put it, like it's like a manual labor job and it's not important. And I'm going to continue to say it is one of the most important ones because it's the last one between the voter and casting their vote. And the people who do it feel committed to doing it, but they're not supported and they're not respected. And this role is not seen as a professional role, to Judith's point about professionalization, but it should be.
Right. So I was told that one of the problems was many poll workers are working the early days, and then they realize, boy, it's a whole lot more work for that final day, and I've already done, you know, my 6 days of work, whatever number, I forget what it is, of early voting days, so I don't want to work election day, and that we've sort of poached from ourselves, so to speak, by making the motivation to work the early voting days a more attractive assignment than the actual election day, except it's almost impossible to imagine anything not being more attractive than working election day. When it's 17 hours, there are not enough people, you maybe can't even take a break, you know, and it's sort of a ridiculous thing to be asking of people. I'm amazed as many people do show up still to work poll days. So thank you very much, all of you. Thank you.
Yeah, and they could redo the way they do early voting as well. Like one of the requirements, I believe, from the BOE is you already have to be a tenured poll worker in order to work early voting. Is that necessary? Like you could still go through the normal early voting training because that is a little separate training from election day. And I know that the amount of money is a lot, but there are a lot of poll workers who want to work early voting, but there's so many less poll sites, so they can't. And I think that system could be shifted around as well. And maybe, to your point, it would like lessen the number of people who work all 9 days of early voting and who are supposed to work on election day, because that is a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Krueger. Senator Gennardis?
Great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I think this has been a very enlightening conversation, especially for me who, you know, coming up and being involved in politics, you know, had to think about finding poll workers, recruiting poll workers, and making sure that there was staff for all the local sites even before I got elected. So it's really illuminating to hear kind of your perspectives on some of this. And I think there are a lot of challenges that you've spoke about already. One of the things I want to talk about, I agree, you know, with this issue about recruiting poll workers and finding alternative ways to recruit poll workers. I believe that either this year or last election, the BOE tried a pilot on split shifts in certain polling locations, and it was my understanding that one of the reasons it didn't work out is because they couldn't recruit people for the split shifts because the pay rate set by the city is so low. And so if, you know, you might be as civically minded as possible. You know, a poll worker only gets, what, $250 for the day, $300 if you're a coordinator. You know, why would I give 7 hours for $125, right? That's not worth it to me. And so I wonder if there's an area we can look at to maybe look at the city, which I think sets the pay scale, or the mayor sets the pay scale, as a way to make this succeed, because otherwise we can say it's a great idea in theory, split shifts, it's more versatile, more flexibility. I'm not going to take a job for $125 if I still have to put in 8 hours for it, right, for the whole day. So I think that's an area that we should be looking at, I think, pretty strongly. And, perhaps when we talk about allocations to, in our budget, or you're just working with the city, that I think is one of the root causes that doesn't get talked about enough, that will prevent us from the flexibility, which I think makes sense intuitively based on the way you've all described it. And one of the other things, and I'm glad that we're doing this in a CUNY building, when I taught a CUNY class, it was a democracy class, I asked my students if they wanted to be poll workers, and there was zero interest for them. And so maybe there are ways to think about ways we can use the CUNY system, a college credit to be a poll worker with a seminar or something. Maybe that's a way. And to your point, Ms. Cordero, about trying to address student apathy or young person's apathy, understanding the electoral system from within, I think, might be a way to kind of open people's eyes. If you get a college credit for it, you don't have to worry about making the types of choices that you were speaking about, Jan, about not having to give up work when you're a student to come be a poll worker. So I think there's a lot of creative ways we can think about addressing this problem. And it's been my experience, sorry, this is more of a statement than a question, but it's just based off of what you've kind of put ideas in my head. There are a lot of structural impediments to reform that exist, certainly at the BOE level, but also outside of the BOE level, that make it hard to have a lot of these conversations and to actually implement the solutions the way that we all intuitively think or know these solutions can actually play out. That I certainly hope we can consider over the next couple of months, Chairman, as we're having this much larger conversation around how do we fix the system for everybody. I want to get your thoughts specifically on recruitment, knowing that it's a challenge recruiting individual people, the pay, the training, the long hours, the early voting. What about having city employees kind of fill in the gap if necessary? I'm just curious. As we're talking, I'm thinking we have this 300-person workforce, on call for a city agency, and if there are gaps that exist, is that an area we should be looking more at? I'd love to get your thoughts on that. I don't know if it's the right answer or wrong answer, but I would certainly love to hear your opinions on that as a way to help fill a void.
Yeah, I definitely think that if we do have a 300-plus workforce, and if they want to work for a few hours, definitely. But I definitely more so agree with your point about getting more younger people involved as well, because they are the ones who, I know when I was working as a field coordinator, I used to run across a lot of young kids would ask me questions about, like, well, who's running and why? And they would get discouraged when I would tell them, oh, well, you can't really vote right now, or you gotta wait till you're older. So I definitely believe that it starts in the schools. It starts when we have college credits about working for a poll site. We start having the conversations in schools now about how important democracy is and how important being a poll worker is, and things that you start doing now in school. Because I definitely think this is, while the pay needs to increase, especially if we do a split shift, I definitely believe this is, although it's long hours, this is a great opportunity for a lot of young kids, and for a lot of people who were not into democracy before, who were not into voting before. This is a great pathway for them to get more involved politically and get more involved in civic engagements and start having those conversations, but that needs to start happening in the schools. So if we can provide some sort of internship or some sort of credit, some sort of paid internship, specifically paid internships, a credit to go be a poll worker, I definitely believe it needs to start within the CUNY system.
And I do want to follow up on your comment about the pay, Senator Canardas, because it did increase recently just to make it be minimum wage. And that's something that I want to connect to the professionalism. It's being treated as if it's a minimum wage job. And if we're talking about it's democracy, it's the heart of democracy, is the heart of democracy not worth more than minimum wage? So I think your point is well taken. I've heard from poll workers all the time that, like, this is my last year, I'm not doing this again, I could make more working somewhere else. And I do think trying to get students and get young people and get a wider range of people. So at CUNY, for example, we have a lot of non-traditional students. So it's not just young people, it's people of all ages. And doing something, I've done a lot of voter registration at naturalization events, and so I actually also think tying it to that, it takes a while to really get civic knowledge and what democracy looks like in the U.S. for people who are new Americans, and I think all of them being poll workers, not all of them, but like as many people as we could get, being poll workers would also really help the process, not just about interpreters, but people who are coming at it from different angles and doing it. And I think the city could focus more on people who are engaged with democracy, and I'm going to push back a little about the city employees. I'm just going to make a sweeping generalization that I'm not sure when people think customer service, they think New York City employees. And so I think there can be a pool of people, so maybe it's an opt-in thing that people, but not people just being tapped because they're city employees. That makes sense.
Thank you. I would say, extending your kind of your comments there, we often treat a lot of city jobs as afterthoughts, and that comes with the pay as well. And so, when we think about the professionalization and professionalism of city workers, public workers, we have to pay them fairly and appropriately and, with dignity in order to expect that kind of service that we want from them to run our city, right? So, I think it's important that we don't ascribe terrible motives or implications that our city workforce is not professional, and I want to just make sure that that's not something that is shared or something that I don't support or condone, especially as the chairman of the Civil Service Committee, who I meet with lots of these workers who tell me that some of them are making, $16 an hour for their jobs running the city, right? And it's very hard to do a professional job when you're being treated like you're working, the fast food counter, as a teenager. So, I think that's an important consideration to have as well. And just an idea I throw out there, because it is a very large workforce. Again, I don't know if it's the right answer or the wrong answer, but clearly we have a pool of people here, and we have testimony saying that it was hard to fill positions for a city job, and we have a workforce that might help us, even in the interim, give us that flexibility to think about. And I think the point about non-traditional students was really important as well. It's more than just the people who are already engaged in democracy work. Like, not everyone grew up watching C-SPAN like I know Senator Zellner Myrie did. C-SPAN 2, he was more the C-SPAN 2 kind of guy, I'm not going to say whether he called in, for the comments, but it really is, I think, a way to kind of demystify the process for people of all backgrounds, naturalized citizens, students of all backgrounds. And we have a great institution here. We should think about leveraging the power of this institution that we're in as a way to do that. So thank you all.
People could also get some other kind of benefit for opting in, because you mentioned the civil service, and there are different points you get for different things. So maybe being a poll worker could be connected to the administrative aspect of civil service. So in addition to having higher pay, hopefully, people could also get a benefit, and that could be a way for them to practice civic engagement as part of their job and make civic engagement part of a larger city workforce piece or something like that. So,
A lot of food for
possibilities.
thought. No, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Gennardez. Senator Liu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really want to thank this panel for their insight here, because we actually don't hear from poll workers a whole lot. And so it's really helpful to see how things actually work on the ground as the election is taking place. There have been so many complaints about the Board of Elections in recent years. It's almost as if the Board of Elections is trying to overtake the MTA in most chastised public agency. So this hearing is really, really insightful, and I know that we have lots of other panels coming up. I have one question that hasn't been asked already, and that is that there had been so much consternation about how ranked choice voting would work and whether the Board of Elections would be up to the task of actually administering it. We all know what happened in at least the preliminary counts when they first came out. That didn't really have anything to do with poll workers themselves. My question to you is, in the weeks and months leading up to the primary on June 22nd, do you feel you had enough training on the ranked choice voting, or it was really just the same process as any other vote?
When it came to ranked choice voting, I felt like I did my own research as far as ranked choice voting is and how to better explain it to other people and people in my community. In the South Bronx, where I was a poll worker, we generally do have very low turnout rates, so it's very important for me to be able to tell people about it once they did step into the poll site. So from the BOE, yes, I was able to do an online testing. However, I didn't feel like they gave me enough training about ranked choice voting through the BOE. I felt like I had to learn it by myself. I had to ask questions from other people who I knew. I had to ask questions from a lot of different organizations that I knew of who were really into ranked choice voting. I had like other friends of mine who were into voting, and I had like double, triple check with them about ranked choice voting. So when I go to the polls, I knew what I was doing. But, regardless, I do like ranked choice voting. I do believe it should stay. However, I got most of my training outside of the BOE to better prepare myself for the election day.
Yeah, and I would say I gave training, so I totally knew ranked choice voting, but I did hear from other poll workers, like when I worked the first day of early voting, people asked me, okay, explain this to me. And I went over, and the BOE had like little cards to hand out to voters. And so I went over that with the poll workers, and so they were handing them out to voters. And so I think they got it, but that's another example of, I think it could have been a better hands-on training. Somebody could have actually seen a ballot themselves and to understand. People picked it up very quickly. I think after that first day, most poll workers totally got it in early voting. I did the same thing for my team on election day. I did a 5-minute ranked choice voting so people understood what was going on and to make sure they handed out the materials. I know in one of the trainings that we got, the BOE said it's not your job as a poll worker to explain ranked choice voting and tell people to watch this video. And I'll just say, as a poll worker in various different sites, you don't have cell service in all the poll sites. So that seemed like that was kind of useless and not helpful for voters. And I think they were also basically saying poll workers shouldn't explain voting procedures. And I get not trying to be partisan, not trying to influence people, but there could have been a different way to do it that could have made sure that all the poll workers totally knew what was going on and they weren't influencing voters. Because like I said, I think people want to be helpful and they want to make sure people can vote, and we do have procedures to make sure people aren't doing that.
Yes, and I also had older poll workers who were there who telling them, oh, well, you can't just vote for one person. And I kind of had to be the one to say, hey, but ranked choice voting is a thing. Please exercise your full right to vote for top 5 people. And this is how, I had to kind of be the plan B, because I'm like, so many people are telling them to vote one person. I'm like, well, you can, but it's ranked choice voting, and then voters didn't know what that was, and so I had to try to explain to them in a clear way, because I had patience to be able to do that for everyone, but clearly some of the poll workers did not, and so that was very conflicting and very for me personally, after 8+ hours of being there, I was just like, okay, I'm not going to explain it again, because they were telling you to vote for one person. I'm like, okay, vote for one person.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Liu. I do have one question, but just a couple of programming notes before we continue. First, I just got word that Senator Granardez actually had C-SPAN posters in his room as a child. Yeah, right. But
Framed and everything.
exactly. Secondly, we've been pretty liberal with the time for this first panel. I think there is excitement to hear from voters directly, to hear from poll workers. I think the senators are excited. And while I am ready to stay here for many, many, many hours, I do want to be respectful of people's time. So I'm going to be a little bit more strict on the questioning time period. Just as a reminder, the witnesses have 5 minutes. Each senator has 3 minutes. We will allow for some exceptions to that, but I do want to be mindful of time and respectful of that. I just have one question for Ms. Hertzberg. You mentioned this briefly in your oral testimony, but in your written testimony, you talk more about accountability for board commissioners and senior administrators as it pertains to the structure of the boards of elections. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about what you envision that accountability looking like. You mentioned that it should be some sort of external entity, or just your general thought on what a new structure for the boards of elections would look like.
The boards of election commissioners really report to no one. The county boards nominally report to the State Board of Elections, which as a body itself is not accountable to either an elected official or an elected body. So the first point would be to have the boards be held accountable to a specific elected official or to a legislative body. And there are pros and cons to each, so I won't take the time now. But that's what I envision there. So that's the key, that the commissioners, and that the commissioners also should have job requirements and job standards that they can be evaluated against by this body that they're held accountable to, and that when they are appointed, that it's clearly demonstrable that they have those skills and that knowledge. The executive directors who run the day-to-day administration operation for the county boards of elections likewise should have firm job descriptions, have specific skills and job qualifications and requirements that are observable, measurable, that they can be held accountable to by the commissioners, and that the hiring and ongoing evaluation of staff fall to the professional executive directors, that the hiring not be done by the commissioners, and that ultimately the staff does not get funneled through from the partisan bodies. The other thing is these should be nonpartisan jobs. I can't emphasize that enough, that this notion of a Republican and a Democratic poll worker at every table is ridiculous. And we should not have partisan poll workers. That should be nonpartisan. It should be immaterial and irrelevant.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the entire panel. We're very grateful for your testimony. Next up to the stage. Next up will be Danielle Brecker, Marianne Barcelona, and Maria Coffer. Please correct me if I am wrong in the pronunciation once you get up here. Whenever you're ready.
I'm Danielle Brecker, co-lead organizer of Empire State Indivisible. We all testify today under a long shadow cast by new laws restricting voting access in many states. But still, I am optimistic because of the extraordinary progress we have made working together in our state. I will speak about my experiences in the 2020 general and 2021 primary election as a voter, volunteer, and count canvas witness. Empire State Indivisible advocated for early voting, and it is how most of our members voted in 2020. Included with my written testimony are comments from our members about their experiences. My experience was at the Museum of Moving Image in Astoria. The line to vote was 8 blocks long. After 4 hours, I had cast my votes. The urgency of voting in the 2020 presidential election and seeing many of my neighbors in person for the first time in months made this okay, but we need to lessen wait times by extending daily hours, making sure the number of voters assigned to each site is equitable, and adding more machines and locations, including mobile sites. Also, like Georgia, New York state law prohibits giving any provisions, like bottles of water, to a voter at a polling place. This law needs to change. I have witnessed contentious count canvases, but nothing like the 2020 presidential election count canvass. Some of the witnesses were willfully ignorant about how our democracy and elections work. They were aggressively vocal about alleged cheating, conspiracy theories, and that the Board of Elections is, I quote, a treasonous criminal organization. They questioned everything and did not believe the answers, but they believed every word of misinformation they had heard. We need to counter this, not by burning down our democracy as insurgents tried to do earlier this year, but making sure every valid vote is counted and New York voters enfranchised. Reforms to the BOE should include professionalizing election administration staff, prohibiting county chairs from serving on boards, changing the appointment process for election commissioners, and standardizing statewide policies and enforcement, plus investing in every BOE across our state with consistent annual budgets so they can robustly serve every voter, enact all reforms, and modernize. Now I will move to the 2021 primary. I live in Council District 26. We had 14 Democratic candidates on the ballot. Even with a reduced number of required signatures, petitioning was not safe given COVID. We need a way to get candidates on the ballot that is safe, modernized, but accessible, and that enfranchises more New Yorkers. Empire State Indivisible advocated for ranked choice voting. I believe ranked choice voting lived up to its promise to enfranchise more voters, and coupled with public financing, gave us more and more diverse candidates. But in my view, ranked choice voting did not always result in positive collaborative campaigning. In the council race in my district, some of the campaigning was negative and nasty and targeted with malice not just other candidates, but their supporters, elected leaders, and community members. This behavior is deeply disheartening and resulted in disengagement, fear, and a lack of focus on candidates' policy platforms. For RCV to work, and with public financing, there needs to be guardrails to how candidates behave towards each other and the community that they endeavor to serve. During the primary, I spoke to many New York voters on behalf of the Maya Wiley campaign. There were questions about RCV as well as early voting and absentee voting. That does not mean we should throw these reforms out. It means we must continue to educate all of the reforms we have made and will continue to make. This is the time to build on what we have started, to enact many more bold democracy reforms to enfranchise and uplift all New Yorkers. And this is the time for New York State to rise up and lead our country by showing what people engaged in our democracy can achieve. Thank you.
Good morning, committee members. My name is Maria Kaufer, and I am a resident of Forest Hills, Queens. Professionally, I work as a registered dietitian and certified diabetes educator. I come before the committee today as an active volunteer leader and member of many community, civic, and good government groups and organizations that are committed to establishing an electoral system that truly practices the democratic values of transparency, accountability, accessibility, and inclusivity, including Queens County Committee for All, Central Queens Independent Democrats, Central Queens Redistricting Coalition, Amplify Her New York City, and New York Working Families Party. I'm serving my second term as the Female Queens Democratic County Committee member for Election District 23 and Assembly District 28. And in 2020, when first-time absentee ballot voters had no ability to cure defective ballots, I was a candidate for Female Democratic District Leader of Assembly District 28 Part A, losing the election by a little over 100 votes. Last year, I served as a board member of New Reformers, which supports grassroots district leader, state committee, and judicial delegate candidates for volunteer Queens Democratic Party leadership offices. In the very beginning of the New York State state of emergency due to the COVID-19 pandemic, I was the main coalition organizer of the March 13, 2020 virtual press conference that quickly and successfully advocated for reduced signature requirements for ballot access in the 2020 primary election cycle. As a board member of New Reformers and candidate for Democratic District Leader, except for 2 days, I observed the entire summer 2020 primary elections paper ballot canvass at Queensborough Hall. I was also able to observe the paper ballot canvass for 1 day this month at Queensborough Hall. My impression is that the rank-and-file Queens BOE workers actually do excellent work and take their jobs very seriously. And Queens BOE leadership is fairly accessible to Queens voters, relatively quickly responding to voter questions and concerns. And I remain an active volunteer for the campaigns of grassroots candidates for public and party elected offices. Today, I am speaking on behalf of the Working Families Party, as well as to testify on my personal experiences over the last 7 primary and general election cycles as an enthusiastic New York City voter, former candidate and incumbent for unpaid party offices, and volunteer poll site canvasser for grassroots candidates for elected offices. The Working Families Party relies on fair and accessible boards of elections to run grassroots candidates and give voters a choice in their elections. Unreliable boards of elections systemically undermine non-traditional candidates who are often women, young people, and people of color. We owe it to these candidates to have BOEs motivated by access and not by political gamesmanship. Publicly funded institutions like the boards of elections require staff and investment that want to give challenger candidates and third parties equal opportunity to succeed. The major parties and the boards of elections inherently have an advantage when they are so often staffed by members of the Democratic and Republican committees. Intentional staffing and independent appointments of boards of elections commissioners will go a long way in ensuring the BOE is treating all candidates and voters of all parties equally. Across the city and the state, we see a dearth of representation that would be remedied by active investment in regulating the boards of elections, making them more accessible and less politicized. Consistent and rules-based decisions from the BOE are so important. This year, the BOE decided to reject the Working Families Party's Certificate of Authorization, which kicked their candidates off the WFP ballot line. The commissioners decided this despite the fact that the WFP followed all election laws and BOE rules. It's unfair to hold the WFP and WFP candidates to a non-existent standard. And more importantly, it's unfair to voters who will not have the choice to vote for their preferred candidates on the ballot line of their choice. As a third party, Working Families Party heavily relies on Election Day poll site visibility for our elections. At some poll sites, poll workers have not been informed about critical information, like the distance campaign staff need to be from poll sites. This has continually caused trouble for volunteers and our insurgent candidates who are working to introduce themselves to voters. Inconsistent training of Election Day poll workers and inconsistent administration of poll sites have confused and at times disenfranchised voters at my local poll sites in Central Queens. Thank you, committee members, for working to improve our state's electoral system so that fully fair and open elections can occur. The Working Families Party, my fellow coalition organizers, and I stand ready to work with you to ensure voters' fundamental right to choose their preferred representatives are protected and supported in New York State.
Hello, I'm Marianne Barcelona. I've been a seasonal worker, poll worker with the Board of Elections since 2008, and currently I am an early voting coordinator, a trainer of poll workers, and an assembly district monitor in AD 69 on Manhattan's Upper West Side. First, I want to thank you for allowing me to speak, and I want to say how grateful I am for the opportunity to serve our community. I consider this a sacred duty, and I try to impart that to people that I train. And I hope that when we're recruiting poll workers, instead of emphasizing with the ads on the subway, you can be paid, have it say, what can you do for your community to support democracy? And you'll even get paid. I would really like to see that emphasis. So I also want to say I'm very grateful for the many really good, caring, careful workers that I have worked with out of Varick Street and on my teams as a coordinator and as a poll worker. But I also want to say there are some people who are not so good, and they are protected by patronage. And many people know this, and they say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. So I think that's sad. But the people that I trust are terrific, really terrific. Okay, there's several issues I would like to discuss. First of all, basically I'm going to talk about what I experienced on this primary day, although it's the same as what I've been experiencing as an AD monitor and other things. The early voting went great in our site, and I heard good things about it other places, but the AD monitor experience I had this time was the worst I've ever had, and I've had some bad ones. It just got worse. First of all, I want to say that the basic poll worker training is not adequate. Before COVID, at least we had in-person classes, but the classes were cut down from 8 hours to 6 hours, then it went to 4 hours, but the 4 hours is really 3 hours and 10 minutes because there's a 20-minute introductory video that they could read easily in their book, and people come in late because they're not told they have to be there when the class starts. And then there's a 30-minute test at the end. So we're training for 3 very specific jobs that are all getting more complex each time in 3 hours and 10 minutes. The Zoom training, I was not allowed, as a trainer and an AD monitor, I wanted to take all the online classes to see what is being told to people. I was told I could not do that because the Board of Elections can only pay me for one, and I had to choose between the AD monitor class and the coordinator class. But I know someone who accidentally is a coordinator and got sent the regular poll worker refresher. He got halfway through it and then had to go somewhere else, so he signed out to be able to come in again, and it said, "Thank you, you've passed the test." He didn't even finish it. People who take the refresher or the basic online do not get any hands-on training, do not even get a manual, so they can't turn to page 34 or whatever it is when they come in at the beginning of the day to set up. What I experienced as a result of this whole thing is confusion and workers being overwhelmed at the beginning of the day. The keys don't actually get there from the police and get to the hands of the poll workers to open the carts until 5:15, 5:20, 5:25. There's a line of voters out the door. By then, everybody's frantic, and half of them don't know they're supposed to open up the manual and turn to the pages that say step 1, step 2, step 3. So they pull everything out of the cart. Everything's upside down, mixed up. As an AD monitor, the site that I helped to open had 17 tables. Many of them had nobody show up. They had to split. They had to send people separately, so there were no bipartisan teams, and some of the people that were there by themselves had never done it before. They didn't know the procedures. If you don't open correctly and have ballot accountability, it's not going to balance at the end of the evening, which is one of my concerns about a split time. Split's great, but how do you manage the disparity between the fact that the people who opened may not have done a correct job, and then the other people come in and have no idea where the problems are? Okay, I experienced a lot of things. People were blissfully unaware that they were unaware of the procedures. They didn't even know they were doing things wrong. Their hearts were in the right place in most cases, but in some cases they weren't, and they shouldn't even be poll workers. Okay, ballots were left in unprotected positions. Carts were not set up according to the way they're supposed to be set up, so that if you go to lunch and somebody else has to come in and sit in that place, they know where to find anything. Cradle points and BMDs were not plugged in correctly, and they were not placed at the ADA 5 feet mandatory thing. And that is at almost every site that I go to, year in and year out. It's never placed correctly. The floor plans are unreadable. They've become unreadable in the last 2 or 3 years. The icons are squished so you can't even tell which belong to ADA and which regular. So people are not following them anyway, but they also need to be updated. One of the sites that I went to had a configuration that had to be changed, and there were 10 scanners plugged in from one unit, one plug in the wall. That doesn't, they're going to blow something. Okay, there was great confusion between what they had been taught were procedures for handing out the ballots and the way the ballots came. There should be last-minute instructions when they change. Several times this has happened where they've divided EDs, put several EDs together, or this time they had a 2-page ballot that was packed differently from the way we'd been trained. And as an AD monitor, I'm trying to help people and I'm telling them one thing and then I open it up and it's completely different. As an AD monitor, they should certainly have special instructions that they could email to us the night before. They could email them to the coordinators. They could put a piece of paper in the cart, whatever. Yes.
If just 30 seconds
Oh,
more.
God,
Just trying to-
okay.
And it's okay.
All
It's
right,
okay. We will read your submitted testimony,
Okay.
so you don't have to go through
Okay,
everything.
affidavits were illegible. I saw several where the voter has lost their vote because I couldn't even read the name. The pay scale is way too low. There was a serious shortage of poll workers, and they were calling around asking for emergency coordinators the day before. I talked to one who had never done it before, didn't get the proper training, and he got one poll worker. And the two of them had to process 300 people, and they had the policeman doing information. Okay, support materials were missing. They didn't come from downtown. Okay.
Cut you off, Ms.
That's
Barcelona.
okay.
I just
No,
want
that's
to
okay.
make sure we give everyone the right time. I'll give you a closing sentence if you want to close this out.
Okay, thank you.
Nope. Okay. All right. All right. So I do have one question, and again, we're very grateful for all of your testimony, and we'll take it under advisement. A number of you mentioned the petitioning process and the requirements and the need for change there, and I'm wondering if you can speak more to what you believe that might look like, or any other models that you think we should be considering.
In my view, it should go to some kind of hybrid of online. There still has to be a physical component because there are seniors and other people who will not use online. But I think it needs to be online, and I think it needs to be more substantive, because what I was experiencing, and perhaps it was because there were 14 candidates, was I would go to the farmer's market and I would just literally have 14 people surrounding me, yelling at me. And I think that I'm not really making a decision about who I want on the ballot. I'm just trying to get people away from me. So that seems strange. But I do think, even without COVID, we're doing it in the winter when it's flu season. Maybe we can do it online so we're safe and we're healthy and we're not spreading disease, and we're really thinking about who we want on our ballot.
Danielle and I frequently organize together, being Queens-based people. But I agree. I think that the pandemic really highlighted the need to move our electoral system into the 21st century somewhat. And I understand that there will be a transition process, and the importance of accountability and transparency, and perhaps having, paper still legally. But since, you can even look up if you're eligible to vote and where online. There should be a way. I feel like we waste so much on challenges, for example, to petitions, to signatures on petitions, when if we simply had a way that you could, on the spot, electronically check that someone is a valid voter in that district, wherever you're running, that would be so efficient and cost effective. So a way to do that would be terrific and, frankly, safer going forward.
I do have to add that I ran for assembly, and the biggest expense that I had was the lawyer and the petitioning, which seems crazy, because then what if I didn't get on the ballot? I just spent a lot of money that was donated to me. That seems crazy.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for your testimony. Next up, we will have Kate Duran, Bonnie Nelson, and Julie Kerr.
Okay, good morning. Thank you very, very much for doing this. This is very different from the kind of hearing that I'm accustomed to. I'm very grateful that you're focusing on sort of the ordinary folks. My name is Kate Doran. I am a registered voter and an enrolled Democrat right here in Brooklyn. Way back in 2004, Joanne Simon, who is a friend of mine and was my district leader at the time, appointed me to be a poll worker. And then in 2006, she asked me to be a poll site coordinator, which is the job I did all the way through 2016. I've also done the job for the Board of Elections of election night reporting at a police precinct. And in 2019, I returned to the job of being a rank and file inspector at early voting at election day poll sites. So I worked in the old lever machine days, worked through the transition to the optical scan system that we have now, and I've seen lots of wonderful things that have happened, early voting, of course, but many, many issues have remained the same. You heard a lot of testimony about recruiting poll workers, inadequate training of poll workers, problems of not getting poll workers to show up. I believe that early voting is a marvelous thing, but I think because of the pay structure, the early voting system has poached workers from Election Day. I actually spoke to the commissioners in another role I serve in, and I suggested to them that they calculate an attractive and reasonable rate, hourly rate, for poll workers so that they would not create a disincentive to work on Election Day. Because at the rollout of early voting, you could work as a poll worker for 6 hours and get the same day rate that you got for working a 17-hour day on Election Day. And I suggested that that was a tremendous disincentive, and that the real disincentive to being a poll worker, and as one of the earlier testifiers, I believe Mary Barcelona said, we should be recruiting people because to be on the front lines of serving their fellow citizens. But I think an hourly rate is something that the boards of elections should think about, and then that would equalize that. Now, I have another very specific suggestion about recruiting and training poll workers. And my thinking is that we should have a model similar to what we have to getting a driver's license in New York State. Everybody knows, teenagers know, you go in and you pass a written test, and then you get a permit to drive a car. If we had a sort of a rolling system of permitting potential poll workers coming in all over the counties, all over the state, and taking an open book test. There was testimony earlier about people not paying any attention to the manuals. One of the advantages of this would be that people who wanted to be poll workers would self-select. These would be people who are interested in reading a manual and understanding what it had to say. From there you go to hands-on training of the scanner, the electronic poll book, the BMD, whatever, and also real simulated experiences of being in a poll site so that you could understand how to interact with voters, something that is critically important. So I think this would be less expensive for the boards of elections as well. There's a tremendous difficulty now with finding places to hold classes, organizing on-site classes, online classes. I've never done an online class, but I can't imagine that it would be really helpful for the poll worker job. So, and the trainers wouldn't be reading to the poll workers. The other suggestion I would have to say, there's been much talk about split shifts. I am all in favor of it. Dr. Flateau organized one in my poll site several years ago. It was a great success, and the Board of Elections just ignored it. And the other thing, the last thing I would say is the boards of elections should fully embrace the alternative poll site staffing plan, which is in the statute 3-500. The early voting model is a great model. It serves the voters very, very well. We have what we call any line, any time. No worries about what your election district is, and it would work hand in glove with the split shifts because poll workers can be slotted in at times when the site is busy and where they're really needed. So the last thing I want to say is, as far as recruitment, 20 years ago I talked to somebody about the jury duty model of requiring poll service. And there was someone, I won't mention the name, who said, oh, other minds have thought about that too. But maybe it could work, because we don't want we want frontline poll workers to be serving their citizens, to have that real sense of, I'm serving my fellow voters. I really want to do this job, and it's a very important job. So thank you very, very kindly. Appreciate very much being here.
Good morning. Thank you very much for holding this hearing. I think this is terrific. My name is Bonnie Nelson, and I'm just testifying about the experience of an ordinary voter. My mother-in-law is 97 years old, and she has been voting via automatic absentee ballot for several years. Her ballot is mailed to her. This year, during the primary election in June, she happened to be in a rehab facility in Greenwich Village and not at her home on the Upper West Side. But she really wanted to vote, so I had been picking up her mail, and I collected her absentee ballot, and I brought it to her. And together, she filled out the ballot. She had no trouble with ranked choice voting. She thought it was great. And, her hand is a little unsteady and her eyesight's not great, but she worked really hard and she was able to fill out the ballot. And she gave it to me to make sure that it got, taken care of and submitted. I was afraid to trust it to the post office, so I had read that, and I think it said it on the ballot, that I could take it to any early voting site or any primary or any election day site. So I live in Brooklyn, and I brought it to an early voting site in Brooklyn at the end of a day on a Thursday. Very nice poll worker met me, was very happy to take the ballot. We talked about the fact that it was filled out correctly. The envelope was great. She took it. She said it would be submitted. A few days later, I started checking on the Track Your Ballot site to see if it had been accepted or if she had to cure it in any way, and it never showed up as having been received. The status never changed from out for delivery, and that's what it still says today. So finally, I kept hoping it would, resolve itself, because I had no time to deal with this. There was a lot going on. But finally, on a Friday afternoon on July 2nd, it was the Friday before the 4th of July weekend, I finally had a little time, and I called the Board of Elections in Manhattan to find out what happened to the ballot. And the person I spoke to there who answered the phone said, oh, well, you shouldn't have brought it to Brooklyn. You had to bring it to Manhattan. She lives in Manhattan. And I said, well, that's not what it said on the website and on the ballot. And he said, well, maybe I can find somebody to help you, but I doubt that there's anybody around. And he transferred me to somebody's phone where I left a message and never heard. But since he said I should have called Brooklyn, I called Brooklyn. I spoke to somebody there who said, well, I think everybody's gone already. And but he'll see if he could find somebody. And, again, I was transferred to somebody who wasn't there. I didn't have time to call again, and I never found out what happened to the ballot. So I don't know whether there's a box of ballots that was never picked up and delivered, or whether ballots that were delivered in one borough never made it to another borough. I never found out what happened. It was very frustrating. It was very upsetting that the people who work at the Board of Elections didn't know the rules and were not able to help me, and that on the day when they all should have been very busy working on, taking care of on canvassing and taking care of the ballots, that everybody had left early for the weekend. And I never told my mother-in-law that her ballot was not delivered, as far as I could tell. I just didn't have the heart to do it. I was thinking about this last night, and I thought that one of the things, besides better training of the people who work at the Board of Elections, one of the things that would be good is, I know that when political parties, when candidates ask for their voters in this district, they find out which elections they last voted in. And I think it would be really nice if the voters could find that out too. I mean, I can check online to see whether I'm registered to vote, but it doesn't tell me when I last voted. So if somehow this could be updated really quickly and people could find out, yeah, you voted 2 days ago, relax, your vote counted. That would be a wonderful thing, and I don't see why it couldn't happen. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you.
Hello, my name is Julie Kerr. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I wanted to talk about my experiences in this year's primary. My written testimony includes a little bit of a shout out to ranked choice voting. I was really thrilled with how it ended up working in the city and with the outcome. There's a lot more detail in my testimony, but I couldn't be more thrilled that our city council next year will be the most diverse that we've ever had. And that, for me personally, that it will be majority women. I think that's outstanding. I don't think ranked choice voting was the only contributing factor to that, but I think it was definitely a significant part of that outcome. I did also want to speak today about the notification or lack thereof of poll site changes to voters. This is not a new problem. This is voters not being informed of poll site changes is an ongoing problem. And for this most recent primary in Brooklyn, as the Board of Elections has done since early voting began, they've increased the number of early voting poll sites. That's an excellent thing, and that trend needs to continue. We need as many early voting sites as we can possibly have. And also, locations change often, and that's understandable as well. But for both of those reasons, some voters are assigned to different early voting locations, and that's what happened to me this year. And I'm not upset about that by any means. I learned about it weeks ahead of time because I was able to use the poll site locator online to do that. That's a tool that I don't know that everybody knows about, that it exists, and certainly not everyone has access to it. I did not, however, learn about the location change from the mailing that I received from the Board of Elections in April. That is the mailing that was sent to all New York City voters ahead of the election. So there was no indication on the mailing. It includes my election day poll site, but it did not include my early voting poll site location. So I know that the Board of Elections is required to send out a mailing to voters 65 to 70 days before the election. That's a reasonable amount of time. However, with the June primary, that puts that into early to mid-April, that time frame. However, the Board of Elections is not required, their deadline to approve and finalize the early voting sites is not until early May. So there's that discrepancy there in the timing of it. That, I think, is really kind of a first, for the most part, well, not exactly, but since we now no longer split our primaries, our state and federal, or our federal primaries and our state ones, that is an impact. So, I'm so grateful that New York now has early voting. It's been long overdue. Along with the other election laws you all have passed in the recent years. I'm very grateful for those and looking forward to a lot more to come. These reforms are necessary to make it easier for New Yorkers to exercise their franchise. I urge all of you and your colleagues in the Assembly as well to take a look not just at these two particular deadlines, but overarching all of the deadlines in the legislation that you're working with, and make sure that they line up in a way that and are adjusted as needed in ways that are more efficient, not just for the Board of Elections, but informing voters of what their basic information that they need to cast their ballot, and certainly where they need to go to cast their ballot is the most basic of information. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And before I kick it to my colleagues, Ms. Nelson, if you could, before you leave, just if you're okay with this, provide your mother-in-law's information to our staff so that we can follow up with the Board of Elections on that. And this is precisely why we wanted to do this hearing in this style, in this way, to hear directly from you. So we will follow up with the board. Colleagues, Any questions? Okay. Thank you very much for your testimony. To the stage will be Henry Flax, Shelley Cohen, and Emmanuel Zabeda. Please, again, correct me if I'm getting the pronunciation wrong. A second call for Emmanuel. Okay, so we're gonna bump somebody up if that's okay. Mr. Will Blomker. No? Okay, all right. So Will. Yeah, he's not here. Okay. Is Mr. Martin Asher here? No? Okay, so we'll figure out. We'll rock out with our two for now, and then figure out the rest. So whenever you're ready.
Good morning, and thank you to Senators Myrie Liu, Kavanaugh, Krueger, and Gonardis for holding the hearing. My name is Henry Flax, and my testimony is delivered from the perspective of a lifelong New York City voter as well as a poll worker for the last 6 years. I'm certainly not qualified to address the local election debacles from the recent past from a 30,000 feet perspective, but I wanted to share my experiences with the problematic hiring, training, elections assignments, and election management on the microcosmic level. The hiring of incompetent personnel is inexcusable, and most of what I would have said normally is redundant to what you've already heard from prior panelists, so I'll skip over that and respect your time and the time of everybody waiting to speak who's still in the audience. I do want to talk about training, though, and mention some things that have not been mentioned, and try to explain why there are so many problematic poll workers. Unlike some of the other speakers, I do feel, from a positive point of view, that the printed materials given to poll workers are excellent. The manuals are easy to read, they're well illustrated and well organized. Unfortunately, as other speakers have mentioned, too many trainers gloss over functions, rush through the training, try to end early, which serves no one well. And certainly in the last round of early voter training, there was no exam. So there was absolutely no reason to rush through anything, since no one was going to be tested anyway. The final exams are open book, but most trainers, and this is over 6 years of training, spend far too much time teaching to the test, reminding poll workers again and again the answer to this is found on page 32, even though it's open book and the exam tells you where to find the answer. So it's inexcusable. As long as county leaders use patronage rewards for family members, friends, and political allies who unfortunately pass answers to the training quizzes among themselves at the training. So it's just an incompetent system, and no one is managing or supervising those things. I really have no issue with the culture of nepotism and favoritism, but I do want the nepots and the favorites to be competent. Sadly, this is not the case. In terms of on-site staffing, I've worked with some excellent poll workers, but I've also worked with poll workers who have failed to provide both sheets of a 2-sheet ballot because they refuse to read instructions, beforehand, and then literally argue with voters who actually know they deserve a multi-page ballot. I've served with table inspectors who can't process an affidavit ballot and punt it off to other colleagues who are competent to do that. Poll workers refuse to read the manuals even after being told to do so by coordinators when there are problems at individual tables. And then they are completely incapable of closing down their stations at night, forcing the competent workers to do the jobs of their own tables as well as the incompetent tables, so that you can go home after a 17 or 19-hour workday. Just in case you're not familiar, no one is supposed to leave the poll site until everyone has completed their days. Coordinators. It's been mentioned before, but the late arrival of coordinators affects the timely opening of the poll sites, as police officers, and rightly so, refuse to provide keys to other workers who are ready to do their job but are not authorized to do so. I've worked under coordinators who don't know how or when to call for technical support. I've watched scanners go down and refusal to call the board for technical assistance or additional staffing because I don't want to look bad, quote unquote. Meanwhile, all scanners then go down and they don't know how to institute emergency ballot procedures. It's just a disaster with no one who seems to evaluate coordinators or poll workers at the end of a shift. So that's one major area. People have talked about the pay scale and how abysmal that is, but the ability of some workers to close efficiently lengthens the period of service after 9 p.m. And this is critical because poll workers are not paid for 1 minute past 9 p.m. I've been forced to stay until 1 in the morning to close out a poll site. If you can pay workers for the hour to set up between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m., why are you not paying a minimum of 1 hour to shut down the poll, put the materials away, do the final canvass? The first and last hours are the hardest part of the day. And to be not compensated for the final hour, which is most critical, is one reason you lose several competent workers every single election. That has to stop. Indentured servitude went out in this country over 100 years ago, and we're still doing it with the Board of Elections and poll workers every single day.
Flax, if I could, just 30 seconds.
Sure,
more.
sorry.
It's okay.
Early voting has offered a much better model for conducting accurate elections in the digital age. The use of tablets in coordination with printers allows the board to save thousands of dollars in printing costs for ballots which on election day are pre-printed, and when they're not used, they're hopefully recycled. But the waste of money and paper for printing, transportation, packaging, recycling is obscene. The early voting connection between the tablets and the printers should be used for every election day. The money you could save on all those things I just itemized could be used, A, to pay workers a living wage, and B, to save money on ballots. Tailoring a ballot to the voter's ED and AD eliminates human error as well, so if you can't get rid of the incompetence, at least you work around them.
Thank you, Mr. Flex. Just one closing sentence, if you'd
Sure.
like.
In addition to these hearings, I would recommend that you continue to contact competent on-the-ground workers to help identify more of these issues. And I hope that this session is one of many more to come to address the issues that have been enumerated before the committee. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Hello.
My name is Shelley Cohen, and I just want to start off by thanking the committee for taking, the time to listen to your constituents and the issues that we face during the election. So I'm a resident here in Prospect Heights, but I just graduated SUNY Binghamton. Yeah, I go SUNY system. But there, this past year, I served as a Vote Everywhere ambassador for the Andrew Goodman Foundation. For those who are not familiar, it's just a nonpartisan organization, working to reduce student barriers to voting. So I was very hands-on with voters through this process and working with Binghamton's Center for Civic Engagement. So through this testimony, I want to focus on, the general election in 2020 in Broome County, because that's, where I was working. And I'm going to discuss a few issues that I encountered, but the rest is detailed in my written testimony, and you can read that afterwards. But the first issue that I want to focus on was the delays with processing voter registration. So I started, along with my team, registering voters right when students got to campus. So that was mid-August. And we continued through August and September, but a week before the voter registration deadline, there were students stopping by the Center for Civic Engagement. I had friends calling me, texting me, and saying, my voter registration is not showing up online. I didn't get any confirmation that, it was processed. What do I do? And, this is an undue, burden on voters to have to go out of their way to ensure that their voter registration has been processed. Now, the second issue that has been talked about a lot today is the poor training of poll workers. And basically, a lot of students, we move around a lot, and we often have to vote via affidavit ballot because we move every year and we don't necessarily have the time to change our voter registration. So a bunch of students went to an off-campus polling site to vote via affidavit ballot. And the poll workers instructed them to put the address of their parents' home, which is outside of Broome County, right, where the students live during the summer months. And these ballots were contested in New York 22's congressional race. And the judge said, this is really tragic, but these ballots cannot be counted because the voters signed a legal document that said that they lived outside of the district in which they were voting, right? So the students just did what they were told to do, and now 20 ballots, 20 students, their voices were not represented in this really, really, really close congressional race. Now, the third issue, which is really personal to me, was bringing an early polling site to Binghamton's campus. Now, we have an on-campus polling site for Election Day, but we have over 20,000 students, staff, and faculty that come through our campus every single day. Only 6,000 students live on campus, then can vote on campus on Election Day. So it just makes sense to have Binghamton University as an early polling site. So during the summer of 2020, I went to the Board of Elections of Broome County and I said, I want to advocate for an early polling site on our campus. And they said, we are super overwhelmed. They were processing all of, the absentee ballot applications, and they're like, we just do not have the funding right now to open a fourth early polling site. And we said, okay, we'll put this on the back burner and this will be our fight next year, but a couple of weeks before Election Day, they opened up a fourth early polling site, not on Binghamton University's campus. And this is really upsetting to me because I don't really understand why we are not actively encouraging students to vote, right? We're the youth, we're the future leaders, of this country. One day we're gonna be sitting in those chairs. And I think that we need to make sure that we are engaging the youth in our democracy. It shouldn't be difficult, it should be easy. And I think, the first step in doing this is mandating on-campus election day and early polling sites, because it sets an example, right? On Binghamton, on Election Day, our entire polling site is staffed by Binghamton University affiliates, except for one person, right? And that one person works for the Board of Elections, and she was helping students fill out affidavit ballots. They know the problems that we're going to be facing, right? We have so many students, hundreds of students vote via affidavit ballots, so they have enough affidavit ballots, and they have someone dedicated to doing that. And with all due respect to Senator Gennardis, and what he said, he had a small sample size in his classroom. We want to be poll workers. It's just really difficult when you have an exam on election day to then go to the polls and be working for hours, right? And it's nice, to see your friends there and be like, hey, let me help you vote today. So, I think that on-campus polling sites are a really great way to start in engaging the youth in our democracy. Thank you.
Chairman Myrie and committee members, my name is Martin Asher. I'm an attorney living in Brooklyn, speaking in my personal capacity today. In 2019, while still a law student at NYU, I wrote an article on reforming New York City's Board of Elections. In that article, which I'm happy to share with the committee or staff, and I have a couple copies with me just in case, I cited incidents such as the illegal purging of 120,000 voters before the 2016 Democratic primary, the Charter Revision Commission's proposals being printed in the 7.5 font size due to their refusal to create multiple ballots in a smaller number of languages. Unfortunately, the article stayed relevant. I recirculated the piece in 2020 after the BOE sent many Brooklyn voters, including myself, the wrong internal envelope in the absentee ballot, and of course again after what happened in June with the mayoral primary. While the problems each election were different, the root was always the same. The New York City Board of Elections is an agency in serious need of reform, and state legislation, or even better, a constitutional amendment, are needed to take power away from political insiders and give it to a professional staff capable of administering elections for the people of New York City. The structure of the board is established in the state constitution. Article 2, Section 8 of the state constitution requires that the Board of Elections have a bipartisan composition. And according to the Constitution, these board members must be nominated by representatives of the parties. This means that commissioners have a dual role, with obligations to both the public as government officials and the local political parties. Given that all election administration decisions are made by the board, this dual role has detrimental implications. The bipartisan structure is based on the premise that since neither party could be trusted to be unbiased, an evenly divided board would ensure that the parties watch over each other and mischief is minimized. While this approach may have made sense in an era when political parties had traditionally taken the lead in administering elections, it doesn't make sense today. Many New Yorkers do not affiliate with either of the two major parties, and this structure prevents these voters from being represented on the board. Additionally, only 10% of New York City's voters are registered Republicans, but they get the same amount of voting power on the board as the 68% of the city's voters who are Democrats. Since the board's decisions must be made by majority vote, this gives the Republican Party's commissioners an effective veto over everyone else in the city if they vote as a bloc. My first proposal would be to remove the bipartisanship requirement from the New York State Constitution. While I would not require that all board commissioners be unaffiliated with a major party, I would amend the state constitution to allow unaffiliated people to serve as commissioners. In doing this, the city's board could be restructured and based on the model of the city's campaign finance board or merged into it. That agency is a nonpartisan agency made up of 5 commissioners, 2 of whom are appointed by the mayor, 2 by the speaker of the city council, and 1 chosen jointly by the mayor and the speaker. Each of these appointees have a staggered 5-year term, and the mayor and speaker cannot choose 2 board members from the same party. Using this structure would reduce the dual loyalty problem, as commissioners would have no direct incentive to protect county parties. Given this, the public interest side of the dual role will benefit at the expense of the partisan side, which is likely more interested in preserving the status quo. It would also remove both the disproportionate power over city elections Republicans currently enjoy under the current system and the required exclusion of those unaffiliated with the major parties. There would also be operational efficiencies to be gained by merging these 2 entities, and there's more detail about that in the written testimony that I submitted. But additionally, obviously, given the difficulties of passing an amendment to New York's Constitution, it's worth examining what could be done either instead or while awaiting passage of the amendment. This would be a damage mitigation approach, and it would use legislation to strip away as much power from the city's Board of Elections commissioners as is legally possible under the Constitution, and give this power to the board's executive director and staff instead. Since these staff members are not directly chosen by the party executive committees, they should at least in theory be less prone to the political pressures felt by the board commissioners themselves. Under this approach, the board would remain in place nominally and with 5 members from each of the 2 major parties, although they'd have significantly less power. If the professional staff of the city's board is to be given an expansive set of new powers, it also makes sense to ensure the staff is qualified. The Department of Citywide Administrative Services can work with the city's board to establish hiring criteria that, while allowing Democratic or Republican partisanship to be necessary requirements, also assess a candidate's election procedure knowledge or other abilities relevant to the job they'll be performing. This could lead to a more uniform hiring process and a more qualified staff. If the staff must remain bipartisan and evenly split, it could at least have clear hiring criteria designed to weed out the worst candidates. This approach would require the passage of legislation at the New York State level, and fortunately there's already a bill in the state Senate to do that. Senator Krueger's Bill 6226, which I'm sure you're all aware of, would take some of the non-essential powers of the board commissioners and give them to the executive director and deputy director. By reforming the city's board, we can improve our elections. It's essential that the public trust that elections are being administered competently. Given the city's recent experience under the current board structure, changes need to be made to keep or restore that trust. Thank you for holding this hearing today, and I hope you will all have the political courage to do what's right for the people of this city. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I have a question for Ms. Cohen and then one for Mr. Asher. So Ms. Cohen, just to firstly thank you for your testimony and your energy and passion. It is 100% true that you will be sitting in these seats one day, and it's important for us to ensure that we're putting our money where our mouth is when it comes to empowering our young folks. I just wanted to make sure I understood you correctly in that you think that we should require our college campuses, even if they are also election day sites, to be early voting sites as well.
Yeah, I think it obviously depends on the size of the university and setting those requirements. You know, we don't need to go into those details right now. But with SUNY Binghamton, like over 20,000 people walk through the halls every single day, right? So only a fraction of them, right? I said 6,000 to 7,000 people can live on campus. So even it's not enough that we have, you know, the on-campus polling site on election day. We need the early polling site, you know, for the 14,000 plus people who are walking through those doors every single day. And they do, you know, they can go off campus and vote with their associated polling site on election day, but it would just be much easier, especially if you're a student who's on campus all hours of the day, you know, extracurriculars, classes, exams, and we don't have time off to vote like other workers.
Got it. But before I ask the question to Mr. Asher, Senator Kavanaugh has a comment.
Thank you. I actually just wanted to follow up. I would just note that often the question of whether a poll site is going to be on a campus, the resistance from that often comes from the administration of the school itself. I'm not going to call out the particular school, but I have had the experience of trying to persuade a college to permit a poll site on their own premises because they have other uses for the space. They're concerned about all the security, and they raise all these objections. Often boards of elections really are looking for good sites, and college campuses often are very good places for that. So not just for you, although I appreciate you raising this issue, but also for anybody who might be listening. If you are a college student and you think there should be a early polling site or a regular polling site on your campus, you may also urge your college administration to seek out the local board of elections and offer that space, because they're often really looking for appropriate spaces.
Yeah, no, and I definitely agree with that, and I know that there has been resistance on the side of universities, and that's why I think I turn it to you as legislators to mandate them, because if it's mandated, then the universities have to do it, right? And they have to find the space to do it, and they do. It just sometimes a headache for them, but for us as voters, it would be really beneficial.
Got it. Thank you. And I was just reminded that the Senate did pass a bill in this arena requiring certain polling sites when they were contiguous to election districts with the college campus. And we did not successfully pass that in the assembly, but hopefully we will get to that in short order. For Mr. Asher, thank you again for your testimony and the detailed recommendations. Do you have thoughts on current Board of Elections employees who are competent, who are doing the right thing, whether or not in our conversations around reform, we should be considering sort of a grandfather clause for certain types of employees, and if so, how would we go about doing that?
I mean, in my proposal, there would be different types of screenings that you would have to go through to prove your competence. So if they are competent, that should be no issue. I think it would also give the public greater confidence that every employee has been checked for their professional capabilities to do the job.
Senator Kavanaugh for round two.
For Mr. Asher, I just want to talk a little bit more about this issue of who should control the board. Okay. Just recognizing that the current structure, which has the parties, the county parties, each of the five, and each party doing that. And I agree with you that the theory behind that is that the principal tension that needs to be managed when you're trying to ensure fairness is the tension between the two parties. But often, especially on a primary day where the party candidates aren't even running against each other, there are other issues of fairness that are not addressed by simply a bipartisan parity provision. But the question, having discussed this issue over many years, there is a question of how you achieve both the perception and the reality of fairness. So it's a situation where you have the mayor and the city council speaker appointing a majority, 4 of the 5 seats, in many people's minds would raise the question of whether the board is going to be favorable to those particular people who are sitting elected officials. This year, for example, the current sitting mayor wasn't on the ballot, but the current city council speaker was. So in many city elections, that's going to be the case. So, is there? In your research for your paper, this is not the question of who appoints the people who do election administration is not unique to New York City or New York State. Are there other models for how those are appointed that are worth exploring?
There are cities that do nonpartisan administration. I believe, and I can get back to you, I believe Minneapolis was one of the cities that utilizes nonpartisan structure, and I take the point. And the reason I suggested the CFB structure is because it appears to me and people I talk to in writing this that there is much more public confidence in that agency. And so you're right, it's not perfect. There is still a political actor in there somewhere. But clearly the way the board is structured now is untenable, and it can't be worse. And if there is a way to at least take a degree of removal for the decision makers, I think that would be a positive step worthy of serious consideration. But of course, when there is partisan considerations, there's always that risk.
I would just say, to the extent that we're going to take, this would be a very big step, including likely amending the Constitution and others. So I think we would want to, if we're going to move down that road, we would certainly want to think hard about getting thinking about the optimal system that we can get, at least for New York, and do it right if we're going to engage in that process, because it would certainly be a big lift. But thank you.
Since you brought up my bill, thank you very much. And just responding for my colleague also, there's nothing perfect about my bill. And truthfully, we really do need constitutional change for some of the core issues that people are addressing about the Board of Elections. And it's not just New York City, but it's statewide, although my bill is specific to the city. And you were right, when you're changing the Constitution, especially since it is such a long process to move through. Both houses of the legislature, 2 sessions in a row, then a vote of the public. You really do want to get it right, which is why I do think that not only my bill, but a number of the other bills that have been proposed, you know, allow us through statute to sort of piece together a better system when there's no doubt flaws in any proposed ideas we would have. But at least it would help get us to a more reasonable place for assuring the public, you know, that they can have confidence in their voter process and they actually can have a not horrible experience when they go to vote.
Thank you.
Just to add, I would recommend a constitutional amendment, but you're right, that's at least 3 years would have to pass, and there's going to be multiple federal elections, city elections, state elections in that time.
Great. Thank you very much for your testimony. So we're gonna shuffle things a little bit. I think some folks had to leave because of timing. So if you hear me repeat names, it's just to make sure that everyone is getting the opportunity that is here to testify. So I'm going to call again Will Blomker, Emmanuel Zabeda. Okay, Hassan Bakruddin, who I don't see. I know Julia Peña is here. Peña. So you can make your way up to the stage. Is Genevieve Vida here? Great. And I'm not sure if Andy Marte is here. Nope. Okay, let's go to Lulu Frezat. Okay. David Sifford. All right. We have a full panel. Like that Mr. Asher said, it can't get worse. That's probably the tagline for our hearing. It can't get worse.
Also accept.
The 21st century, just saying.
Julio.
Thank you. It's good afternoon by now. I'll be speaking on behalf of some Brooklyn district leaders, myself, Emil Bazile, Shaquana Boykin, Christina Napolitarski, and Jesse Pierce. First, I just want to acknowledge and thank the hard work and dedication of poll workers and staff at the Board of Elections, many of whom we have gotten to know over the past 18 months and have dedicated several years to ensuring our elections run smoothly. They have shown up during the pandemic and ensured our elections are run with integrity, and we are immensely grateful. As district leaders, one of our key responsibilities is to work with the New York City Board of Elections to recruit poll workers and staff poll sites for early voting and election day. District leaders do not have a lot of power or influence as a rule, but there is a lot of influence when it comes to the Board of Elections. We have seen firsthand how this poll worker recruitment is used to pack the poll sites with friends and family. In the past 2 elections, we have heard and seen reports of toxic and inappropriate behavior from poll site coordinators, such as harassment, berating, and misinformation in the election process, disrespectful and inappropriate behavior from BOE trainers, lack of available trainings, and disturbing reports of the state of facilities used for trainings, a BOE staff member calling us to ask which Democratic club we belong to in order to recommend it to a poll worker. We have also witnessed the larger failings of the election management, including the 2015-16 voter purge of over 100,000 voters, many of them in Brooklyn, the 2018 and 2020 ballot scanner shortage that caused significant lines, and the 2020 absentee ballot fiasco to almost 100,000 Brooklyn voters, and more recently in the primary, failing to remove 135,000 test ballots. And during the COVID pandemic, we witnessed a huge surge in public interest to serve neighbors, fellow voters, by working the polls in the 2020 election. We heard over and over again the various poll sites in November about the positive influence of new energy, interest, and talent at the polls. We also heard from many of our constituents who received no communication from the Board of Elections after signing up as interested in working the polls, or who were sent to the holding warehouse area in Sunset Park with little to no communication on what that meant and what to expect. More recently, we witnessed the lack of retention of that 2020 energy for the June 2021 elections to a distressing degree. As leaders, we are provided detailed staffing information of poll sites in our districts. A vast majority of poll site workers who were assigned to work on Election Day by the Board of Elections had either not taken a required refresher course or never confirmed their availability to the Board of Elections, meaning the personnel assignments data clearly indicated that many of these assigned poll workers for the June 22nd Election Day made no positive indications to the Board of Elections that they plan to work. To our knowledge, the leadership at BOE implemented no mitigation or late-stage recruitment plans in order to fill the extensive staffing gaps. This lack of responsibility and preparedness directly negatively impacts the temporary workforce at Election Day poll workers. They are forced to come up with solutions and stopgap measures on the day of in order to do the necessary work on Election Day. Get the site open on time, make sure people can vote, and close the site correctly. We are forced to reach out and recruit untrained poll workers on Election Day in order to pitch in and get some sites to a functional state. A majority of the Election Day poll workers are not Board of Elections staff. They are neighbors who enjoy the work and performing their civic duty. These Election Day poll workers and New York voters are increasingly not served by the partisan dysfunction that we've come to accept as normal Board of Elections modus operandi. There are common sense solutions we can implement both in the short term and long term to improve how we run our elections. Short term, publicly post for positions and conduct national searches for senior level positions, more qualified training for BOE staff and poll workers that include real world examples and common issues at poll sites, greater transparency in data collection and reporting that includes methodology from public feedback and input, and long term, the professionalization of our elections, civil service positions that are not appointed but merit based, and a nonpartisan Board of Election. Removing political appointments out of the process is the single greatest way to remove patronage and corruption. Ensuring safeguards and accountability mechanisms are in place to hold senior staff accountable and change practices as needed. Over our short term as district leaders, we've witnessed the exciting implementation of voting reforms like early voting, expansion of absentee voting, and ranked choice voting. We've also continued to witness the Board of Elections' reactive, operational attempts to implement these changes fail and cause incredible stress on temporary poll worker force. The problems that plague the system are structural. It lies in the archaic ways in which the organization conducts its business, appoints its leaders, and to an extent appoints election workers. It is a relic of Tammany Hall, Boss Tweed, and a patronage system that we know leads to corruption, inefficient practices, and voter suppression. It is also worth saying we hold the BOE commissioners and its leadership, local party bosses, and the state legislator directly responsible for the continued failings of the Board of Elections. The accountability for this embarrassment of how New York City and New York State elections are administered every cycle sits with the people who hold the power to change how the organization is structured and operates. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairman Myrie and members of the Senate Standing Committee on Elections. My name is Genevieve Vida. I'm a resident of Brooklyn and Vice President of Policy for New Kings Democrats. NKD appreciates the invitation to provide testimony today. NKD has centered its work on bringing transparency, accountability, and inclusionary democracy to the Kings County Democratic Party. Since 2008, we have activated Brooklyn neighbors by helping them register to vote and run for county committee. Last year, we reviewed hundreds of rejected absentee ballots to ensure voter enfranchisement. Many people today have already spoken and brought forward testimony regarding the inefficiencies and the challenges that the Board of Elections staff, particularly poll workers, face. These challenges that are leading to errors and the disenfranchisement of city voters can all be traced to the politicized leadership of the Board of Elections, which has been discussed quite a bit before me, and the inability of city officials, particularly, and therefore the public here in the city, to hold election administrators accountable for their behavior. The Board of Elections is the only agency where positions are held simultaneously by two individuals and recommended by county political parties. In theory, bipartisanship ensures fair and balanced elections, but we have seen the hyper-partisan nature of these rules lead not to cooperation, but conflict, confusion at the ground level for staff, and the unequal distribution of resources across our city. The 10 bipartisan commissioners who lead our city's Board of Elections are picked by party leaders in each borough, and they have failed election workers and voters alike. The bipartisan requirement in our state constitution has meant those who oversee and manage an integral part of our democracy, including at least 350 deputies, clerks, and other personnel, are hired on the recommendation of party officials rather than a merit-based civil service system that governs almost all of our other public sector hiring. NKD's review of political contributions by Brooklyn BOE employees to the Brooklyn Democratic Party and campaign accounts of its last 3 party bosses found that employees who had previously not given to the party or its leaders began making donations once they started working for the BOE. And while it is not illegal for BOE employees to make political donations, if they felt compelled to donate money, it suggests heavy influence by outside political forces. The political nature of the BOE is furthered by the body's insulation from city council oversight and mayoral direction. The BOE is a state agency, and though funding is provided by the city and commissioners are officially appointed by New York City Council, there is no direct mechanism by which the public can hold the board accountable other than through the courts and litigation. For example, in 2016, the mayor offered up to $20 million to implement reforms that would update its operation, increase communication with voters, and help register folks in the city, and improve the quality of poll worker staffing, including training and salary increases. However, the BOE rejected the money and all suggested reforms. If the BOE is to carry out fair and inclusive elections, then it must operate as a fair and inclusive body. New York should encourage and promote career civil servants for BOE leadership. The long-term solution, as a panelist before me said, is to amend the New York State Constitution to ensure the state and county board of elections are nonpartisan and include safeguards against partisan favoritism at all levels. Like employees of other government agencies, the professional staff of the Board of Elections should be hired based on merit through a competitive process without consideration of their political party membership, political activities, or personal relationships. Until we can achieve these changes to the Constitution, county parties should be required to arrive at their recommendations for BOE commissioner positions through a competitive, transparent process that includes the entirety of the county committee in their borough. As an example, Senate Bill 6226A, which prescribes qualifications for the commissioners of the Board of Elections, provides a good starting point. In addition, the City Council should use its power of appointment to extract promises of reform from potential commissioners, and the New York State Legislature should provide adequate training for local elections and adequately fund the execution of elections. New York and Nevada are the only states who do not provide training programs for administrators at the state level. Poll workers should be hired without consideration of their political party membership. Poll worker training standards should be improved. And on behalf of New Kings Democrats, I thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony, and I encourage our state legislators to increase the accountability of the Board of Elections to the public.
Thank you, Chair Myrie and the rest of the Senate Election Committee for having me here. My name is David Siffert. I'm here as the chair of the Legislative Affairs Committee of the Village Independent Democrats. I'm also the Director of Research and Project at the Center on Civil Justice at NYU Law, but I'm here not in that capacity. I'm here in my capacity with VID. I'm here because there's a Board of Elections problem. This is true on the city level, it's also true on the state level, and it's also true in counties outside of New York City. We've all heard stories about how New York State has particularly bad turnout, confusion among voters. If you talk to people inside the Board of Elections, they'll tell you all sorts of horror stories of dysfunction. I'll give you 2 really brief examples from what I've experienced. Last year when I was viewing absentee ballot counting, I spent about 6 hours at one of the sites. During those 6 hours, we counted 4 ballots because the procedures they were using was opening a ballot, scanning it, bringing it back, marking it up, going back, scanning opening the next ballot, scanning the next ballot, and because of the line for the scanners, this took 6 hours to count 4 ballots. That's not the procedure that had to happen. As another example from this year, I went around to a number of the polling sites in the village. Almost all of them had roughly 50% turnout among poll workers. This is because the poll workers had been automatically signed up from the previous year without having been called or told that they were going to be poll workers again. When the poll site captains called their poll workers the night before, almost all of them, about more than half of them, said we had not heard about this before at all this year. We had not been contacted whatsoever. So they had roughly 50% of what they needed. This causes concrete harms too. For example, last year we saw in the congressional race that in New York 22, I believe, that a seat was actually likely flipped as a result of the fact that the county BOE up there lost ballots. This year, we've seen the problems in the New York City Board of Elections being used by Republicans across the country to perpetuate Trump's big lie about the need for voter suppression. And I think it's important to note that you all as senators, and not just the three of you here, but the entire body of the Senate and the Assembly has been aware of these problems for quite a long time and has failed to act on it. And that failure to act is now resulting in Republicans across the country pushing voter suppression legislation. And so it's important that you all take accountability for that failure to act and actually do something. So I'm not particularly an expert in elections administration policy, but I'm a research director, so I've been going around to talk to a lot of the experts in election administration, both in New York and outside of New York, tried to come up with some strategies for how to solve our problems. And one thing that I hear over and over again, and you'll probably hear it today from other speakers, is accountability, professionalism, transparency, and voter centricity. Voter centricity is something that you've all been working on. This is the early voting that you've done. This is the no excuse absentee ballots. These are substantive improvements that make voting easier, and I commend you on those efforts. There's more to be done. We can have voting centers where people from all over the county can vote anywhere in the county. We can have more early voting sites, but I do commend the work that you've done. But I'm a proceduralist. I study civil procedure, and so process and structure, I think, is something that's really hasn't been addressed. And this process and structure, the patronage system that we have, is causing these negligent problems that in turn lead to really big concrete issues like losing a congressional seat. So in terms of accountability, one thing that I hear over and over again is the need for an elected chief administrator of elections. So for states that have an elected secretary of state, they have much better results in terms of turnout and other metrics than states that don't have one. This can also be applied at the county level. For example, the executive director of the New York City Board of Elections could be an elected position. Now, because of our Constitution, you need equal representation of the parties, but it doesn't say that you need both parties represented. So you could have a nonpartisan elected Secretary of State or a nonpartisan elected Secretary of Elections who's not registered with the party, and you could have that elections much like, for example, we did the special election for public advocate in New York City, which was a citywide election without primaries or parties. And this would be consistent with the existing Constitution. The other thing, next on professionalism, the first thing I want to say on that, we have a lot of very hardworking folks in the Board of Elections, but if they're not picked to be the most qualified, most competent, most expert people, no matter how hard they work, no matter how sincere a job they're trying to do, they're not going to do the best job possible. And it's going to cause problems. And I commend Senator Krueger for a very good bill that's working on professionalizing the Board of Elections because it allows the executive director to select them. I don't think it goes far enough, which is not to say it shouldn't pass as a first step, but we shouldn't view it as the only thing. A few things that it doesn't cover. First, the executive director is still appointed by the commissioners, who are still patronage positions. It only applies to New York City, and it doesn't require things like a civil service exam. So I think there are ways that it could go further, but I do think it's a good first step. With respect to transparency, I'll just give a couple examples. The absentee ballots that went out last year said military absentee ballot because they forgot to put a slash in it. If that ballot had been released to the public just a few weeks in advance of their being sent out so the public could give comments, that wouldn't have happened. Similarly, the envelope design that didn't make clear that needed to be signed. Again, if these things had just been showed to the public, there had been transparency in the process. And these are things that can be solved by laws. You can have laws that require the ballot design be published in advance with a time for comment. Doesn't mean that those comments need to be approved, just means that a chance for input. Similarly with polling places, every once in a while you have an ED that has a polling place that's a mile and a half away, and then the district leader or the president of the club, and I've had to do this, has to call the Board of Elections and get the polling place for that election district shifted. And it's about who you know, about whether you'll actually be able to access your polling place without having to go a mile. I want to close on one particular thing which happened last night, which is that the Executive Committee of the Manhattan County Committee met, and without having put on the agenda in advance, put forward a new candidate for commissioner for the Manhattan Board of Elections, which passed. But no one was notified. There was no application process. There was no search for the most qualified candidate. It was a few people in a room who decided this, and this is in the midst of all this patronage position. And I also want to be clear that this is in violation of the county committee rules, which says that the agenda needs to be submitted in advance when the notice for the meeting goes out. So a number of people couldn't make the meeting or came late because they didn't know that this was even happening. This is happening in the midst of all these problems. So if you're worried if you think that things might be getting better, they're not. The patronage system is still going quite strong.
Thank you.
I always thank David for his thoughtful testimony anytime he's testifying on anything. So thank you all three for your very eloquent testimony.
Senator Kavanaugh.
Just for David, you mentioned that states with elected central election administrators have better outcomes. I mean, I think a lot of people's best recollection of an elected administrator of elections is still probably, Bush v. Gore in 2000 in Florida, when the elected Secretary of State, I think Kathy Harris, was very clearly pushing for a particular outcome as an elected statewide Republican. But are there sort of studies that
There are studies. I don't have them with me, but there are rankings of states in terms of turnout and a number of other outcomes in terms of how good they are. And it's something like 30 states have elected secretaries of state, and it's something like, I'm trying to remember the numbers, but they're like all in the top 40 or something like that. So like statistically, more likely to have the higher up you are, the more likely you are to have a Secretary of State. I did run the numbers.
I guess I was going to, if you could,
yeah,
follow
I'll
up and
send
get
them.
us.
I'll get that to you.
And the theory is that, has somebody sort of taken the step of sort of determining that works better for
the theory is
particular
accountability. The theory of someone's job is on the line, that they're more likely to make sure that things go right. And I think that a big problem that we've seen in both in New York City and in New York State is that no one's job is really on the line if things go wrong.
Okay. Yeah, so if you could follow up, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you all very much for your time and for your testimony. All right, so we're going to continue. All right, I was going to say we were going to continue the roll call, but we have, I think we have our next panel. Please come to the stage, Dana Water, Laura Kleinman, and Dorothy Siegel.
Hello, my name is Dana Waters. I work for the National League of Cities and manage the Cities Vote program, which works to provide technical assistance and resources to city leaders in the area of elections and voting. In that capacity, I have the privilege of working with leading experts on voting rights, as well as dozens of municipal staff and elected leaders across the country, whose common goal is to ensure that every eligible voter is able to cast a ballot safely, fairly, and easily. I'm also a proud New York City poll worker, and I've been serving my local voting site since 2016. I do want to emphasize that I'm speaking on behalf of myself and not any organization. I want to take this opportunity to speak to a few key issues I've seen as a poll worker and as a voter. I will note that this is the first time in 5 years that any feedback has been solicited from me as a poll worker, so I really appreciate the opportunity. In New York City, every poll site has a member of the NYPD stationed there. This has become an issue of concern to many New Yorkers, particularly after an incident last fall in which a member of the department used his police equipment to electioneer for one of the candidates, and several others in which police intervened at poll sites to stop volunteers from handing out personal protective equipment to voters. It is not a violation of New York law to hand out anything to voters so long as it does not exceed $1 in value and you do not identify yourself. Other cities have seen the problem with having police involved in election activities. Whether or not an officer would actually pose a threat to a voter is irrelevant. Voters may perceive a threat, particularly voters of color who have historically been targets of police violence. For this reason, the city of Madison, Wisconsin decided that it would no longer use police station community rooms as poll sites. This came about as part of their voting access equity plan, designed to ensure that each eligible voter would be able to cast a ballot and have that ballot counted, and following the city clerk's initiative to conduct a race equity analysis. I will note that Madison is 78% white. New York City is significantly more diverse and, to my knowledge, has not conducted such an analysis. In other states, including Pennsylvania and Tennessee, police are not allowed within poll sites unless they are there on official police business or requested by a poll site worker. The fact that certain groups are more likely to feel intimidated than others is extremely problematic and suggests that this policy would violate Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which Congress amended in 1982 to include a results test prohibiting any law with a discriminatory effect, regardless of the intent. I would also argue, as Elena Kagan did in her recent dissent in the Supreme Court case Brnovich v. DNC, that Section 2 ought to prohibit another hallmark of voting in New York, invalidation of ballots cast outside a precinct. Justice Kagan pointed out that such rules disproportionately impact voters of color, notably Black and Latinx voters. New York, and in particular New York City, throws out thousands of affidavit ballots cast by voters who show up to the wrong precinct. For some voters, it might be easy to walk 5 or 10 blocks to the correct poll site, assuming the poll worker gives them the correct poll site. For New Yorkers with disabilities who are juggling one or more full-time jobs or who live in precincts with long lines, this isn't quite as easy. New York law only requires employers to grant employees 2 hours of leave time to vote and requires that employees notify their employers at least 2 days in advance. If you've used up that time and your employer is not understanding, you're out of luck. As a poll worker, I hate having to tell people that they're in the wrong precinct. I tell them that they can cast an affidavit ballot, but that it is unlikely to count. Democracy is meant to apply whether or not you saw the notice of a change in polling place or if you even received it. There are 2 obvious fixes to this. First, the state assembly, I believe, has had a bill idling since May that would require provisional ballots cast out of precinct to be counted for all races that they would be eligible to vote in were they at the correct location. Second, as has been mentioned before, voting centers and more early voting sites, which permit voters from not just narrow precincts to vote there, would allow voters to have a little bit more leeway in whether or not they show up to the right location within 2 blocks. The new e-poll books make this much easier, as we've seen. I do want to bring up one other point, if I have time. Cybersecurity is a growing threat in the United States. The threat of ransomware attacks poses an enormous risk to voting systems, and the American Rescue Plan Act does permit funds to be spent on cybersecurity upgrades. I would encourage the state Senate to take a look at that, because as much as roads are necessary, community institutions are necessary, democracy is also extremely necessary and shouldn't be an afterthought. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Laura Kleinman. I'm here today to share my experience as a first-time poll worker in New York City. I feel like I'm representing the over 30,000 New York City residents that, for the most part, I feel volunteer their time as they're paid less than minimum wage and not overtime for the hours that they work. Our democracy is clearly under attack, and because of this, I feel like a progressive city like New York, the entire country looks at, or should look at, as a model of equality and serving the interests of all New Yorkers and citizens of the United States. The New York City election process should stand out as a pillar of democracy, an example of what a modern, clear, sanitized, and transparent election process should look like. And this is not at all what I experienced as a first-time poll worker. What I found was a disjointed, guarded, and antiquated system that did not efficiently serve the poll workers and/or the voters of New York. I walked away from my experience as a poll worker confused and scared for the democracy, with a deep feeling there was intrinsic problems within the Board of Elections, obviously many of those previously discussed here today. I arrived at my assigned poll site in Brooklyn, New York at 5 a.m. on Election Day. At 5:10, we made our first call to the Board of Elections to let them know that no coordinator had arrived. As no one had showed up, we had called again and never heard back throughout the day regarding whether a coordinator would be coming. At 5:30, I was approached by a tech person that was assigned to our site and asked if I would be the acting coordinator. I happily and enthusiastically agreed and was handed a very large manila envelope with everything I would need to run the day. Mind you, I have no experience ever as a poll worker and or managing a poll working site. Prior to Election Day, I had reached out to the Board of Elections several times in order to take the refresher course that I was under the impression was mandatory and required in order to be a poll worker. The link to this course was never sent to me. When I did finally get a Board of Elections representative on the phone, they told me it was unnecessary and they assigned me to my poll site anyway. It had been over a year and a half since I'd taken the course and passed it, thinking I might be a poll worker for the presidential election. It felt very disorganized to me, and after discussing this experience with other poll workers at my site, they all expressed the same level of frustration and also mentioned that the refresher course that was actually offered was more about the ranked choice voting system than any daily operational policies and procedures that we would know in order to perform our work as a poll worker. Needless to say, I had an incredible team working with me, and we were able to open on time. I do want to reiterate, as somebody else spoke, that there were only 11 of us assigned to our poll working site, which means we were incredibly understaffed. We were basically forced to really just use which I can agree, the handbooks that are given out for any questions that came up through the day. I think we only had 4 people that had any sort of seasoned poll working experience on our team. When we were opening and closing, we did fortunately have a tech person at our site to help us with some setup and some closing, but his time was very limited, as he had told me he was managing 21 sites that day, and several others also did not have coordinators on site and were also short-staffed. Our site was so short-staffed, as somebody else had mentioned, that I was unable to give proper breaks to anybody that was working. Also, my understanding, as it was also mentioned earlier, is that legally we are supposed to have both a Democrat and Republican managing each poll worker table, and that was obviously not the case. Due to being short-staffed, and as the acting coordinator, it was my responsibility, like I had mentioned, to organize breaks. And I did want to just reiterate, as it's been said, as far as having shifts set up, seems like something that is kind of, to me, a no-brainer. Obviously, there are logistics to work out as far as that goes. Anyway, throughout the day, we had 2 visits from a team of 2 women from the Board of Elections. They proceeded to yell and curse in front of voters when I was explaining to them that a mistake that had been made with an affidavit ballot by one of our poll workers. They berated and antagonized one of our poll workers in front of voters, which was both embarrassing and unprofessional on all levels. When they realized that the mistake was theirs, there was no apology, just what seemed like an entitled excuse, which led me to apologize to my poll worker. These two women at times when they were there as well explained to me that we would only be paid until 9 p.m., which was also discussed earlier. And they also mentioned that the affidavit ballots would not even count because they would not even get to them until September. They would be sitting in some warehouse somewhere. This was all very disturbing and confusing to me at the time, but my priority was to make sure that every vote counted and that we were reconciled correctly at the end of the day. My assumption is that New York citizens do not volunteer to be a poll worker for the salary, which I understand to be between $150 to $200 for the day, which equals a little over $8 an hour, which is far less than our minimum wage. The coordinator salary is $350 a day, as far as I understand. We become poll workers because we feel it is our civic duty and responsibility to take part in our city's democratic process. For this reason, we all deserve to be treated with dignity and respect and paid fully for our service. Yes,
31 seconds.
That is all I have to say.
Okay. Well, that's a great way to end. Ms. Siegel.
Hi. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Hi. Good morning. My name is Dorothy Siegel. I am a Brooklyn resident, a Working Families Party registered voter, and the former very long-time treasurer of the New York Working Families Party. I have been a WFP member since its founding in 1998. I've been working in electoral politics for decades, I realize it's about 60 years because I was a kid. I feel a personal obligation to help elect good people to elected office. That's why I've been involved in electoral politics. All New York City voters rely on the Board of Elections to administer fair and transparent elections with impartiality to who the candidates are or with whom they are affiliated. As a voter in the November 2020 election, I had an excellent voting experience. And while I did not vote in the Democratic primary last month, I volunteered at what turned out to be a well-run poll site. I want to thank the Board of Elections and the poll site workers who facilitated that while implementing early voting and ranked choice voting amidst a pandemic. But I do have concerns about decisions made by the Board of Elections leadership in New York City. This year, Board of Election Commissioners decided not to accept the Working Families Party certificate of authorization for almost all WFP candidates, which had the effect of kicking the WFP candidates off our ballot line. This was an unfair decision that ignored the New York City Board of Elections, State Board of Elections, and State Department rules, and New York State election laws. The New York City Department of Ed held the Working Families Party to a non-existent standard and took the extraordinary step of removing our candidates from our line. This is unfair to the party. It's unfair to these WFP candidates. But more importantly, it is unfair to New York City voters who will not have the choice to vote for their preferred candidates on the ballot line of their choice. This ruling undermines confidence that the Board of Elections is committed to running elections in a fair, objective, and legal manner. Amazingly, the Board of Elections commissioners didn't appear to even review the relevant state election law and executive orders, much less their own rules, or to consult with their legal counsel before making this decision. You said earlier today that the New York City Board of Elections couldn't be worse. This is worse. I just wanted to say parenthetically, okay, so most of the people that we put on our ballot in New York City are running on the Democratic line. So they can still get the candidate they want. They can get the Democrat. The people that I know in my neighborhood who vote overwhelmingly on the WFP line, as much as 25% of people vote on the WFP line, usually for the Democratic candidate. In 2014, the people voting on the WFP line in my district, which is the 52nd Assembly District, all votes that went to candidates other than the Democratic Party was half of what we got on our WFP line. People are grateful to have the opportunity to stick their finger in the eye of the Brooklyn machine. And I mean, you've heard from people today who are trying to democratize the process in Brooklyn. Many years ago, I gave up on the process in Brooklyn and got very active with the Working Families Party. And this is a way that citizens who would be voting Democratic, if the Democratic Party weren't so blatantly corrupt, and in other words, so we give them an opportunity to vote on our line. The lines get added together, and people feel that it wasn't so bad because I voted for Brian or Zellner on the WFP line, and we do get a lot of votes. No more, or at least not this year. So almost all of our candidates in the city council and other races will not have the WFP line, even though we endorse them properly. This BOE action speaks directly to the need to not only establish accountability and oversight measures, but to rethink the entire appointment process for BOE commissioners. I'm not going to add to, there were some excellent ideas that were here, and I've been following the work that you have been doing, and I know what's not done yet in the Assembly that you've done in the Senate, so I keep watching. When you got elected, Senator Myrie, I said, and I was told that you were going to the Elections Committee. I said, I don't know if he knows what he's in for, but I was very grateful because you have the right kind of mind for this kind of thing. So I'm extremely grateful that the Elections Committee has taken on the New York City Board of Elections, which I have been fighting for more than 40 years because they're so incompetent. And if you want stories, I could tell you stories that would, I mean, I was the poll coordinator for a candidate in Williamsburg, and what went on there was so egregious that they threw out the election results. One poll site, one ED, had 105% turnout. We weren't allowed to have poll watchers. The person who worked at that site said, oh, we've taken care of that. You don't need poll watchers. Somehow, there were more people voting than there were registered. And it was so gross that the election was thrown out. And as you know, from your personal experience, elections don't get thrown out so easily. So the Board of Elections has been screwing around with this for a very long time. So I commend you for taking this on, and I hope against hope that you'll be able to come up with good solutions. If they can do it in other places, we can do it in New York. So I want to thank you for taking this on and for having these hearings. I learned a lot sitting here and listening to people. I'm sure you did too. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Questions? Senator Kavanaugh?
Can you, Ms. Siegel, nice to see you. And I compliment you on being able to tailor your testimony to each of the senators here. I know you probably could have done it if there were other senators as well, given your, yes. The issue, is there any update on the issue, any kind of litigation or challenge subsequent to on the issue?
I'm no longer an officer, so I'm not privy to that information. I understand that it is, but they could have dropped it 2 weeks ago and I wouldn't know about it. So
I see.
I don't know, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
I want to thank you all. I think all of us from any party in New York, we either should have gotten to know Dorothy a long time ago, or she's still available. Get to know her now, because she actually does know more about what it takes to run for office and the kind of people that should be running for office. So I just want to thank you for over 60 years of work for democracy.
Yeah. Well, some of that was as a child. Just saying.
It counted then.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your testimony. If I haven't yet particularly for those who've served as poll workers. Thank you for your service and for doing this. Folks who were testifying, who were expressing their gratitude for the opportunity to serve, but also pointing out some areas where we could improve. I think that takes courage, and we are very grateful for your pride in your community and in your democracy. So thank you very much for your testimony and for taking the time out today.
Very quickly?
Sure.
I don't believe that there is any prohibition in New York State on elected officials serving as poll workers, and I'd like to encourage you all and challenge you to at least have that experience once. There's certainly not one on staff.
I think that is a worthwhile consideration. Of course, we would shouldn't be serving as poll workers when we're on the ballot, but that's something that we will
precinct at least.
Right, but that's certainly something that we'll take under advisement. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, we will have Mary Vaughn, Michael Hallen, and Victor Jordan. We are nearing the end of our hearing. The plane is landing, as they say. So for the next panel, just so you can get ready to come up, we're going to have Cherie Murray, Heather Phil Orstein, and Tawaki Kamatsu. We will also, for that panel, just so we can have continuity, we'll have 4 people up, if that's okay with the tech folks. And that 4th individual who we had called earlier will be Miss Lulu, missing the last name. Okay, Freisdat. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Okay, panel, whenever you're ready.
Hi. Thank you for hosting this hearing and for listening to the stories of voters and election day workers like myself. I'm actually a constituent in your district, Senator Myrie, and I have been thinking about this moment or writing a letter to you since 2018. I worked the midterm election in Weeksville, Brooklyn. I live in Lefferts Gardens. And I thought at the time that what I experienced was just a fluke. I now understand that these types of occurrences are completely normal. Both of our scanners were broken for the majority of the day, and we had unprecedented turnout, a line out the door. We had literally hundreds of emergency ballots, such that the box was filled and we were having people voting put their ballot into a bag that would be used for something else at the end of the day. It would take a lot for me as a voter to have faith in a system where I am dropping my ballot in a glorified garbage bag after waiting in line for 40 minutes. Since that election, I've attended at least 3 more training classes and worked several more elections, including the November presidential election and early voting. This unprofessionalism and lack of leadership has been consistent in my experience, whether it's in the training or while working the actual elections. Me and my colleagues have been screamed at by trainers and given misinformation on more than one occasion during classes and while actually working on election day. Last month, I received my assignment to work the election in Mapleton, Brooklyn, also not the neighborhood I live in. And I'd like to point out that it is extremely common to be placed as a poll worker in a district quite far from where you live, which was made very difficult to access during the pandemic as the trains did not begin running until 5 a.m. I worked with someone in East New York who was placed in Mapleton, a quite lengthy commute to get to his polling site. So I received my assignment and I was assigned as a Republican yet again. I'm a registered Democrat. This is more than 50% of the times that I have worked the elections, I've been assigned as a Republican. Another one of the speakers today spoke to that experience. Frankly, I don't want to be seen by my colleagues as representing the Republican Party, and I don't like fulfilling a lie by the Board of Elections that they have enough Republican Party workers to have bipartisan representation at each polling site. I thought about writing to you before that election, and then the election actually happened, and I had a very similar experience to the person who just spoke. We did not have our coordinator show up, and at 5:20, we called the Board of Elections. I became the de facto coordinator for the day, and we were pretty much set up and ready to go by about 10 after 6, although it wasn't without an incredible undertaking by my colleagues. We also had 14 poll workers not show up that day to our site. Fortunately, I was assigned at Friends Field, a very small polling site, and we probably saw fewer than 300 voters the whole day. Additionally, in that experience, our ballot marking device was broken for almost the entire day, which meant that any voter with disability would not have been served by the site. This is not the first time that I've experienced this at a polling site. I can't imagine that is legal in any way. I think one of the issues that has been recognized by everyone is that the cronyism is truly rampant within the ranks at the Board of Elections, and that the sort of tension that runs between the parties and the Board of Elections creates a conflict that puts the poll worker in the middle. So while we advertise, or we see advertisements for $2,800 to work all of the early voting shifts on election day, it's actually, you're actually dependent on your district leader to assign you to the class to be able to work the early elections or the early voting days. So it's not as easily done to earn that money or to show up for that civic duty. It's something that's advertised as needed, particularly during the pandemic, but you actually have to jump through a number of hoops to be able to do that at all, including contacting your district leader and asking them to assign you to the class. It felt a little bit awkward to say this before, but I think after everyone who's spoken in front of Republicans and Democratic senators, it's hard to say that the real problem is the parties shouldn't have this much power in running the election, and people shouldn't be doing jobs they likely aren't qualified to be doing, and especially jobs with as much power and importance as being a district leader, which is elected and unpaid. It doesn't surprise me. It shocked me to find out that it was unpaid, but doesn't surprise me how much cronyism is there given how much power these folks have, as well as the commissioners and others. Perhaps if the city of Brooklyn wasn't constantly trying to band-aid all of the issues that are popping up as a result of the structure of the election leadership, some of the larger issues that are occurring would be able to be fixed because there would be a refocusing of energy. For example, I think you could easily glean data after each election regarding the number of folks who checked in for early voting and which ED80 they are coming from, which would allow us to then use this data to predict for future elections what the turnout might be on election day at a specific voting site, and then distribute resources in a more equitable way so that you don't have folks in Weeksville waiting in line outside with not enough scanners while 40 election day workers in Park Slope are just sitting around, both of which I have seen happen. Perhaps election day workers could be assigned by a single election governing body and it'd be done by geography, which might help with the insane level of absenteeism. The quality, professionalism, and commitment to the training of workers and coordinators needs to be significantly raised to match the sheer importance of serving the voters and protecting the right to vote. If we boil this whole job as an election day worker down to the $250 it pays and make the responsibility commensurate with what is roughly $14.70 an hour, then of course serving the voters and protecting their rights is the furthest thing from what is happening. We are New Yorkers. Our right to vote should not feel this precarious.
Thank you. My name is Michael Hallen. I've worked in some form or another for the Board of Elections since the 1990s. First as a poll worker in every capacity in a poll site, eventually a coordinator, and now I am a trainer. I actually train poll workers who work for the Board of Elections during election day operations. I echo a lot of the experiences that have been brought up today, but I wanted to specifically speak about the type of training that's occurring now. As a trainer over the last few years, and it's been brought up before, one of my colleagues spoke earlier, it's been truncated. You know, the type of, the basic poll worker class that's conducted, has been conducted physically, is, as mentioned, basically a little over 3 hours with the test at the end. It actually consists of 3 different original classes that nearly a decade previously were combined into that one class. Combined, all those classes would probably take maybe twice as long, maybe a little bit over that. There was a loss of coverage of each position by truncating it. There was an argument made that, well, if we can train all 3 positions in one class, you can shift people from one position to the other. But no one has an overall understanding of each position as a result, especially when it comes to equipment like scanners and BMDs, ballot marking devices. So quite often, and I function as a coordinator, I'm in that position of actually training people in a class using the curriculum we have, and then seeing the results of it later on, because those are the people that I've trained are working under me. Now, obviously, if I try to do the best I can when I'm training with the curriculum I have, and there's a good understanding, but quite often I'll have people who've taken other classes and like, all right, well, they didn't get a demonstration on the scanner. And obviously now, with the new method of online training from 10X Solutions, there is no hands-on demonstration. And what was obvious in the beginning as like a detriment to the poll worker is absolutely nightmarish in actual practice now, because no, they never have seen it. You know, there was a video to watch, as mentioned earlier by one of my colleagues. Sometimes it'll record that they did watch it and they didn't. It might record that they completed the entire online course and they haven't. That's the system. I know there was a talk for a few years about having online training in addition to the physical training, and I know COVID was the sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, I guess, you know, to cause them to go all the way in, but it was nightmarish, because the materials that are provided in online training are just copied from presentations that we've done in actual training, in which a manual is given out and they're provided with. There are codes and passwords that are used, let's say for the ePoll book or the scanner, that are referenced in those materials that the poll worker who has taken online training does not have. And I experienced the repercussions of this on Election Day, in which other sites, and because some other sites, some coordinators who knew I was a trainer, knew I had those materials and I retained it, they called me, what is that information? Because we have nothing to refer to that day. And they have changed codes for things like the poll book from one election cycle to another. So all the online training was basically for naught, because the critical information they needed that they could have referred to physically from the manual they would have walked away with, they didn't have. So it's, as an adjunct, as an alternative, it was a good idea. But as in place of physical training, it's just not reasonable. It's just not practical. Going forward, I understand COVID is a consideration, but going forward, it has to be physical training in person. Whether it be remedial for people who couldn't complete the online training or people who just need the in-person hands-on demonstration. I've conducted hands-on demonstration of the scanner and the ballot marking device, and without that, the person does not have a real-world understanding of how to use it. And the ballot marking device is I don't want to say overly complicated, but it has multiple accessories to accommodate those with disabilities, and you cannot grasp that from watching a video. You need to see it opened. And poll worker, and again, I tried to train on the job that day with poll workers who take training, who did online training, who did not know what even was. So it's not a practical solution going forward, and I really hope that is addressed and revised. I know it's a borough-wide, citywide decision to do that, but they need to redress it and to find training sites that actually, I know there had been issues before, and I know places like Javits are not on the table necessarily now for them to returning to conventions, et cetera, but they need to return to physical training, and 'cause I've seen both sides of that.
Yes, good day, folks. My name is Victor Jordan. I'm the first vice chair of Community Board 17, where I chair the Block Association Committee. Previously, I chaired the Land Use and Education. I'm also a graduate of Albany Law School. I passed the bar in the year of my graduation, but I'm not a practicing attorney. I'm speaking on my own behalf, not on behalf of the Community Board. As I visited the poll sites in the 42nd Assembly District, where I was a candidate in the primary election on Tuesday, June the 22nd, I could not help but notice the same faces that I see in just about every single election day. Sometimes one or two of the poll workers may change, but invariably each polling site have the same election day workers and the exact same poll site coordinators. In theory, poll workers who are hired with taxpayers' dollars to administer elections are supposed to be free of bias and not favor one candidate over another. In other words, they're supposed to administer the election fairly and free from friend or favor. However, the way that these poll workers are selected to work on election day is anything but being free from bias and thus favoring one candidate over another. Election day workers, including the poll site coordinators, are hired based on the recommendation of the district leaders for that assembly districts who are members of the county committees. This power to choose the poll workers on election day comes from New York election law 3-2263, which read, list of persons recommended to serve as inspectors of election and poll clerks shall be filed by the chairperson of the county committees of the political party entitled to representation on the board for elections. In the 42nd Assembly District, it is not unusual to see the chief of staff of the incumbent district leader managing poll site with the largest number of election districts. Now you are wondering, why would the incumbent district leader want her chief of staff to be in charge of a key poll site in the district? Well, I'll say one thing, that is not out of goodness of her heart. It is definitely as an advantage to have your people managing the polling site in the district, where you have placed the vast number of election districts. We know maybe such persons would look the other way when an overzealous supporter decide to stuff the scanner with pre-marked ballots. Having equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans working on the poll site, which is a requirement of Article 2, Section 8 of the New York State Constitution, makes no difference. In the 42nd Assembly, there are virtually no Republicans, which results with Democrats agreeing to be Republicans for the day. And in primary elections in districts where there are enough Republicans to Democrats, Republicans are indifferent to what Democrats do in their primaries because they only care about outcomes in the Republican primaries. And of course, Democrats will only be concerned with outcomes in Democratic primaries. That there is little incentive for either party to serve as counterweight to each other's corrupt tendencies. The point is, New York election law 3-2263 gives the incumbent district leader an unfair advantage. An incumbent district leader could plant loyalists in any polling site with the understanding that they should do whatever is necessary to ensure the incumbent district leader remains in power, including scanner stuffing. The question is, does this power that New York State election law 3-2263 give the district leader as members of the county committees to choose the referee in an election in which she is a candidate amount to an unconstitutional advantage? In other words, is the advantage so unfair that it shocks the conscience? Currently, we are making the argument in the Southern District Court of New York. Section that 3-2263 gives an incumbent district leader as a member of the county committee the power to administer an election in which the district leader herself is a candidate. Fundamentally, it is grossly unfair to have a candidate choose the referee in a race in which she is a candidate. Because this is so grossly unfair, it shocks the conscience, and then it violates a candidate's constitutional right to fairness in any governmental administered election. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for your time and your testimony, and again, for your service to our democracy. Okay, so I believe we are on the, okay, got it. We are on the last panel, so I will ask Cherie Murray, or Sherry, Phil Orstein, Tawaki Kamatu, and Lulu Friedstadt to please approach the stage. I guess you two will be closing us out today, unless I have missed anything. And again, so just again, if you went for a bathroom break, Phil Orenstein, Tawaki Kamatsu, I think that was it. No. Okay, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm truly humbled and honored to be here. To the Honorable Senator Myrie, to the committee members, my name is Cherie Murray. I am a former state committee woman representing the 29th Assembly District in Southeast Queens. I'm also a former Board of Elections trainer. I'm currently the executive director of Unite the Fight PAC, a proud mother and a staunch advocate. No right is more precious in a free country than that of having a voice in the election of those who make the laws under which, as good citizens, we must live. Both the New York Senate and Assembly committees on election law have made improvements in the past for access to voting for all New Yorkers. However, the entire election system needs to be overhauled. The issues with RCV and other issues stemming from the board have negatively impacted voter integrity and legitimate candidacies on behalf of over 30 Republican candidates, including myself, my co-leader Sam Benoit, who is now a former state committee man of the 29th Assembly District. We are requesting that the election law committees in both bodies introduce the following legislation, look into these issues, and take the appropriate and additional immediate actions, including the city board's timestamp machine. It's only precise to the minute. A more precise timestamp with a second-by-second counter used by the boards entrusted by the taxpayers to supervise and administer elections in New York State would have prevented pre-primary issues from occurring. Election Law Section 3-226 provides that Board of Elections shall direct, purchase, the acquisition or lease of voting machines of any kind authorized by law, which shall be selected by such board provided. However, nothing in this section shall preclude the Board of the Elections from distributing voting machines to the boards of elections without charge. All voting machines and appliances and equipment relating to or used in the conduct of elections, in this case, and the custody and control of the Board of Elections. Such board shall cause all necessary repairs and maintenance to be made to employ such help. This is important to note because since the board timestamp machine is not sufficiently precise, a manifest injustice was worked upon myself and 30 other Republican candidates at the helm of the commissioner, the Republican commissioner at the Queens County Board of Elections in partnership with the deputy chief clerk. My absence from the primary ballot is due to no error of myself or the voters who supported my candidacy in sufficient numbers to qualify for the ballot. I had enough signatures on each volume, but yet those petition volumes were still disqualified. Further, I had no control over the mechanism or the filing as the receiving clerk placed the cover sheets into the timestamp machine. Candidates often submit election documents, including a stack of cover sheets and petition volumes, to the receiving clerk to be processed, as they have no control over the documents sheets being stamped physically. Election Law Section 6-134, Section 2 provides that, in pertinent part, sheets of a designating petition shall be delivered to the Board of Elections in the manner prescribed by said regulations that shall be promulgated by the Board of Elections. So we're following the rules here. The failure to utilize a sufficiently precise timestamp machine will require candidates to hand documents into the receiving clerk in 60-second intervals. You can imagine what this primary election was like. The multitude of candidates. Imagine if they had to stand there and wait 60 seconds to hand in their cover sheets and then their petition volumes. That would be cumbersome and not in accordance with the law. It would be complicated. The outcome was particularly troubling because in my case, the necessity to determine which cover sheet was filed second wasn't even the case. The cover sheets were separately filed in support of my candidacy. They were not identical, so there was no need to determine which one controlled. The cover sheets were separate and distinct. They were from different subdivisions, geographical areas, and contained the names of different candidates running for offices in those specific districts. Nevertheless, due to conflicts of interest on the part of the Queens Republican Commissioner in cahoots with the Deputy Chief Clerk, the use of inadequate equipment, the designating petitions, and my candidacy, along with more than 30 other candidates, were removed from the ballot. Because of the executives in the Board of Elections at the Queens County office, they have weaponized the agency against candidates for whom they don't want to have a place at the table, a seat at the table. The voters of the city of New York should be given an opportunity to choose who will represent them. This opportunity should never again be extinguished due to an innocent and inconsequential error not caused by the candidate, but rather caused by the board's lack of precise equipment. The city board alleged that they were confused by their own equipment and could not distinguish the precise time on the election documents. So they disqualified my candidacy, threw me off the ballot, and I did not appear in the primary election. I served the district over 3 terms, duly elected. It's not paid. You guys know, you've heard a lot of the testimony, prerequisite to mine. I'll move it along. It harkens back, you guys like basketball? It harkens back to the Trent Tucker rule, right? Do you remember when they had a jump shot? Trent Tucker had a jump shot in the last 10th of a second, which won the game for the Knicks against the Chicago Bulls over 30 years ago. Due to the controversial Knicks victory, a rule change was applied to update the rules regarding jump shots in the last 3.10ths of a second in the game and to modernize time clocks that read to the tenths of a second. We need the Board of Elections to implement time clocks that have an accurate, precise measurement of time. This is the agency tasked to administer these elections. I'll wrap it up along.
Seconds, Ms.
Thank
Murray.
you, sir. There were many issues. The one I want to get to here is the boards should train all voters in the state of New York, not just Republicans and Democrats. They should train independent registered voters, conservative voters, working family voters, blank voters. I'm in Southeast Queens, which is a predominantly Democratic Black area. 95% of the poll sites have Democratic workers. The workers are given a tag that says R on it. They did not sign an affidavit. They did not say that they wanted to be a Republican worker, but yet they are forced to assume the role. The elections are not administered in accordance with the law because there is not a bipartisan team administering said elections. This is unconstitutional. I'll stop there, Senator. Thank you so much. I would like to work with your committee to introduce these legislations if that is at all possible.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Murray.
Good afternoon. My name is Lulu Freistadt. I'm the Executive Director of Smart Elections, and I'm also an election security journalist. My investigations have received over 4 million views. My work has been published in The Hill or featured in The Washington Post, Politico, Now This, MSN.com, Salon, and the Christian Science Monitor. Prior to becoming an advocate, I worked extensively in network news, including assignments with ABC, CBS, NBC, MSNBC, and the Fox News Channel. I started Smart Elections with colleagues because we really felt that the issue of security, especially, and transparency were not being properly advocated for. And those are the key issues that we focus on: transparency, security, and accuracy. If we don't have security, we have no confidence that the elections are accurate. And if we don't have accurate elections, we have no public confidence. If we don't have public confidence, we cannot have peaceful transitions, as we saw. So transparency and accuracy are key. They are the foundations of our democracy. Smart Elections conducted the Brooklyn Transparency Pilot Project in the June 22nd primary, and our report from that is extremely discouraging. What we found was remarkable. There are 3 particular issues that I want to focus on. All of our poll watchers were credentialed, and we had a very simple goal. What we wanted to do was to compare in one city council district the number of voters who voted with the number of ballots that were scanned. As you as a candidate understand, that's an incredibly important reconciliation, and we especially never want to have more ballots than voters. What we found at one location was close to 700 more ballots scanned than voters, according to the information we were given and according to the scanner totals that we saw personally. That's extremely concerning. There was no explanation that was plausible that was ever provided by the Board of Elections when we followed up. We also found scanner totals that did not match. This is a little bit complicated to explain, but it's not that complicated. There are 2 counters on each scanner. There's a public counter, and there's what's called the protective counter. The protective counter is like an odometer on your car. It counts every page that's been scanned since that scanner was in service. The public counter is for that particular session, but they can be reconciled relatively easily. They count slightly differently. The protective counter counts each page. So for this election, it counted 2 pages. The public counter counts 1 for 1 voter. At a number of sites, those 2 counters were not reconciling correctly. That is very concerning, and experts that we talked to said that this could have a variety of reasons, including that there could be some sort of internal software malfunction. Those counters are run by software. It could be a misalignment of the paper handling mechanics. It could actually be affecting the count. It also could even be that the device has been subjected to a heavy blow or a drop, something that might not show up in diagnostics. So these are serious issues, and we were also concerned that we seem to be the only one finding them. The Board of Elections wasn't doing these reconciliations, apparently, and not interested in the information that we provided. And the third concerning point that we found was that the electronic poll books did not seem to be always in sync with what's called the electronic poll book summary. And again, that's concerning. You have at each table an electronic poll book, and then you have a separate iPad that's a summary, right? And so if you have 5 more people check in at the electronic poll book tables, the summary should go up by 5 voters. But in some locations, they were out of sync. So then you actually don't know how many voters have voted, so then you don't know how many ballots you're supposed to have scanned. So again, you're really in this territory where you can't have an accurate count. When presented with this information, what we experienced from the Board of Elections was hostility, obstruction, and a deliberate decision to shut our project down. So as I said, rather than exploring this or trying to see, well, what exactly is going on here, they removed my credential as a poll watcher. They also banned me from watching the audit, which is it takes away the candidate's right to have the election observed, and it also disenfranchises the public not to have that audit watched. They additionally deliberately went to polling locations and prevented other poll watchers in our project from collecting data. And this was actually bizarre. The chief clerk in Brooklyn went to Erasmus Hall High School with the deputy and prevented our poll watchers from collecting data that they were entitled to with their poll watcher credential. I ask you, is that really the role in the middle of a busy New York City primary, that the chief clerk is going to go and stop our project. It was a bizarre use of time and resources, and what it really indicated was tremendous obstruction. Additionally, there's been no response to our public records requests that were filed over 30 days ago, even though the board is legally responsible to respond within 5 business days. So, in summary, we can't report that from the Brooklyn Transparency Pilot Project that the election was transparent, and we have significant concerns about the accuracy and the administration. The New York State and the New York City boards of elections cannot continue to function as a protective patronage mill if we are going to have accurate, trustworthy elections. It must be staffed with credentialed, competent professionals who have the skills necessary to conduct modern and technically complex elections that can be publicly verified for accuracy. And I do want to thank you for having these hearings. It's really a delight to see you here, listening, taking notes. We do intend to reach out. Smart Elections has a sister organization, Smart Legislation, and we have a package of legislative proposals to address these issues: security, Board of Election reform, and accuracy, including improved audits. And we do look forward to working with you on that package. Thank you so much for the honor to speak with you today.
Great. Thank you, and thank you both for your testimony.
Well, one, I want to thank both of you. I'm sorry for your ridiculous situation where, we were talking about they need better equipment. We need not to have rules like this so that somebody who's simply trying to file their petitions on time and correctly with the Board of Election can get locked out of a place on the ballot, because we have these, even if they're in law, they're sort of ridiculous rules that have no justification for democracy. What possible difference to your qualifications as a candidate could be seconds versus minutes equipment, right? I mean, it's just not what's supposed to happen. So thank you, and I'm sorry that that happened to you. And for you, so this is so disturbing to me that you were doing a pilot study. You were looking at counts. They don't jive. There don't seem to be any explanation for why they don't jive. And nobody thinks they're supposed to explain it to you or to anyone else. They just think they're supposed to shut you down so that other people don't ask questions. Have you talked to the State Board of Elections by chance?
It's interesting. I did. I sent an email to Tom Connolly, who I believe is the Director of Operations at the State Board of Elections. And what actually was surprising to me, I especially asked him about this business of the protective counter not matching the public counter, because that's very concerning. It indicates that the machines might not be counting correctly. And he said that he sent me back a regulation, and he said there is no requirement that the public counter and the protective counter are in sync. There is simply a requirement that we have both counters, which is just absurd. It's ridiculous. I do want to also let the public know that they can look at our preliminary report at smartelections.us. Just select New York City NYC primary. So if people want to see more of the details about it, and I did provide you with 2 of our documents there that showed odd results that we found on 2 different days.
So it's not the specific assignment of this hearing, but for you to know that when New York State originally went to alternative types of voting machines from the old 400-pound, pull a lever, there are rubber bands behind, they didn't work very well at all, and there was no ability to audit, but they didn't have anything on them that could go wrong other than like that the rubber bands didn't match. So bizarrely, people were comfortable with them, right? And then we had a huge fight in the state about what machines we were going to purchase, and particularly New York City. We held out to the end fighting around it, and we were the last city in the last state of the country to actually decide what machines. And trust me, it wasn't a perfect transition, and nothing was perfect. But we really held strongly to the belief that everything had to be auditable. We had to make sure that there was a paper trail and that you could audit, and that if something didn't jive, there would be an ability to go back and recount everything. And that's how we were going to assure the public that we had legitimate elections here in New York. And there's some companies now that are out there selling their machines to other counties, not us yet, not in New York City, but they're trying to. And they keep saying, we've mastered all this. There are no problems with the new technology, and you really don't have to worry so much about whether they can be audited and whether you can see the numbers and whether, poll workers and poll watchers from whoever candidates can really see things, because trust us, it's all fine. And many of us know in our hearts it's not all fine. And you have to make sure you have the audit functions to make sure that it's as fine as it can be. And now we're seeing from your work here that, why do you even have these counters? Because it's sort of an extra audit function, right? Right? It's not what they don't use the numbers from the piece of paper when they add it up at the end of the night, but it's supposed to be another cross-reference, ability to cross-check how many people showed up to vote, how many ballots did we get from them. And for something to be so wrong and no one to seem to care that they have any responsibility for doing something about it, I am sure it outrages my chair of this committee. And by the way, I'm not even on this committee, so I want to thank you for letting me be here. I got thrown off this committee because when you take over finance, they tell you you don't have time for other committees. But I care about elections so much that I keep harassing this chair and saying, no, let me come to your hearings, let me participate. So I really do appreciate so much the chair allowing me here today and to participate. But I have to say, Senator Myrie, that this should be making us very, very worried about what's really going on with the machines, and particularly in light of the time that we're probably a transition time for machines. And we need to understand, I believe, exactly what went wrong here so that we can make sure, one, that it's not happening all over, but two, that any new machinery New York City decides to invest in for the next decades has a guarantee that this couldn't happen.
It's so great to hear you say that. I know both of you were co-sponsors and actually a sponsor on this bill S309 this year to try to make sure that we don't have a hybrid voting machines, which are aggressively trying to come into the state. And they are exactly what you described. They are machines that cannot be audited and that security experts say cannot give us confidence in the votes. So it's so important. And the Senate, thank you so much, actually passed that piece of legislation. We're so grateful to you, but we didn't get the same luck in the Assembly, and we do need to make sure that it gets passed this year. And we have, as I said, a whole package. We need to look at audits. We need to look at making sure that the audits are conducted by hand. We actually got a provision several years ago where the audits were changed so that they can be done by machine now. And one of the other people who was here, actually, Victor Jordan, earlier, took some photos of the Brooklyn audit. I wasn't allowed in, but he took some photos, and they were basically just like pulling some machine out of a box and setting that machine up in order to do that audit, apparently with a machine that was brand new that they were literally just taking out of the box that day. And since no one except him was there observing, we have no idea what happened in that audit. So we really need to look at the audits. Are they transparent? Are they open to the public? Currently, they are not. You really have to it's very hard to get that credential from a candidate to observe. And are they being done according to best practices? And do we have the machines in place to make sure that we have the paper that we need when we go to audit, we'll be able to trust it? I so appreciate the work that you've done. I know that you both understand this clearly and have made it a priority. I'm very grateful.
Thank you. And thank you, Senator.
Thank you both. Thank you. So that concludes our witness testimony. Before we close, I do want to offer again my thanks, of course, to my colleagues that came, but really thanks to everyone who submitted testimony and everyone that testified in person today. This was a different type of hearing, and even the feeling of it, just hearing directly from voters, hearing directly from the people, really incredibly important for us as we consider how we reform our boards of elections, how we reform the voting process and make the franchise easier to be accessed. I again want to thank my staff, Edleen, Matt, Frida, Terry Ann. I want to thank the Senate staff, Liz Robbins, Andrew Golston. I want to thank the tech folks, Tom Cahill, Matt Carter, Donna Kessler, and of course a huge thank you to Medgar Evers College for hosting us. This is not a small endeavor to put together a hearing, so please give it up for Medgar Evers. Thank you very much. And I will conclude by saying Syracuse and Rochester, we are coming to you next week. So voters, you've seen how these hearings are going to go. Bring your testimony, bring your ideas. Please, we want to hear them. I'm grateful to our Senate Majority Leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, for allowing us to push these through. And I look forward to us engaging with voters from all across the state. Thank you very much.